Chapter 851, No Holds Barred. 7 new gates, a flood of nightmare creatures. Thousands of tired soldiers who had hoped for a well-deserved reprieve after the long and furious battle, only to have that hope snuffed out in an instant. Sonny could feel the resolve of humans surrounding him falter, but in the end, they quickly collected themselves. The officers barked orders, the soldiers hurriedly gathered in proper formations, the lumbering mobile war platforms repositioned to open fire on the new threat. Truth be told, the new development was well within the division's ability to handle. Luckily, none of the gates showed signs of reaching Category 3, so they did not pose more of a threat than the previous 6. The human force had barely suffered any casualties, if any at all, in the recent battle, and they had a theoretical chance of repeating that success. If there was one problem, though, it was that the division, just like Sonny and his soldiers, had overexerted itself in the previous engagement. Logistical vehicles hastily moved forward to give the fighters an opportunity to reload their empty magazines and recharge their armor suits. Artillery needed new batches of explosive shells. Infantry needed energy cells and ammunition. MWP companies needed to cool down to avoid a forced shutdown. All that demanded time, which caused humans to blunder the immensely important opening act of the second offensive. Additionally, they had lost the precious terrain advantage and strategic control due to the fact that one of the gates opened behind them. That just meant that the warriors of the awakened detachment had to pick up the slack and buy their mundane comrades a chance to regroup and properly enter the battle. That included Sonny and his soldiers too. Damnation. Sonny remained motionless for a few moments, studying the approaching flood of nightmare creatures as his mind went into an overdrive. He had no doubt that hundreds of awakened accompanying the division would be able to stall and destroy the threat eventually. However, this time, the human force was not going to achieve victory with minimal losses. Many people were going to die. Was it time to unleash his trump cards already? This is just day 1, for heaven's sake. He had come to Antarctica in search of greater strength. Saving the lives of his fellow soldiers sounded very much like something that a man of conviction would do. However, Sonny was not convinced. Why should he go above and beyond to help these people to even the odds? It was not like they were going to suffer a crushing defeat. Victory was all but guaranteed, with only its cost remaining in doubt. Showing his aces, on the other hand, was a bit risky. Sonny would have felt more comfortable if he and his cohort were acting alone, but here in the middle of a massive battlefield, the thought left a bad taste in his mouth. He was tempted to bide his time. There was a grim feeling slowly rising in his heart, though. Indeed, it was the very start of a campaign that promised to be long and arduous. If Sonny did not go all out and his division lost a bunch more soldiers as a result, the losses would not be anywhere near substantial in the grand scheme of things. However, what would happen if a bunch of soldiers died tomorrow too, and then the day after that, and the day after that? Pretty soon there would be no one left to fight by his side, and that was a big problem. Suddenly, a simple and chilling realization struck his mind. Sonny's eyes widened slightly. The thing he had come to understand was so straightforward that it bordered on obvious. Antarctica was not a place where one could hold back. Even though the chain of nightmares was far away from reaching its full magnitude, everyone had to exert themselves to the absolute limit already, or face eventual and inevitable destruction. In fact, even that might not be enough. Sonny gritted his teeth. He had known that this cataclysm was going to be a dreadful trial, of course, but now it became starkly clear that even Sonny had underestimated the true scope of the disaster. Theoretical understanding was very different from actual knowledge. Standing on top of the corpse of a mighty gate guardian, he sighed and then glanced at his soldiers. That gate over there seems to be bringing our old eyeless friends to the real world. Since we already know how to handle them, it will be our next target. As one of the very few masters in the division and a captain of the first irregular company to boot, Sonny had a larger responsibility than most. It was a given that his cohort would have to lead the charge on one of the 7 gates. However, he couldn't be in several places at the same time. The gate that had opened behind the human formation, the one that posed the most threat and prevented the division from presenting a united front, thus constraining every soldier on the battlefield, was too far away from his position, and so the irregulars had no hope of reaching it in time. Someone else would have to handle it. "Move out, Samara," Change position to get a clear line of fire on the designated gate. Kimmy, stay close to Luster and assist him in covering the vanguard's back. Stay alive. Kill them all. Without wasting any more time, the cohort rushed forward to meet the onslaught of frenzied abominations. Hundreds of awakened joined them, creating a buffer between the nightmare creatures and the line of mundane soldiers, buying time for the division to form an effective response. A dozen seconds after they left, however, something moved in the shadow of the massive carcass. Suddenly, a terrifying black steed emerged from it, carrying a fearsome dark rider. The rider observed the battlefield with cold indifference, and then sent her destrier into a gallop. Their eyes burned with infernal red flames. Nightmare and Saint were heading away from the approaching abominations, toward the hastily assembled battle formation of human soldiers. Chapter 852, The Return of the Lord. A soldier named Ash was not having a great day. Early into the battle, his powerful exoskeleton armor suit sustained damage to one of its knee joints. Although he could still fight and shoot his rifle, not to mention more than willing to face the abominations despite having his mobility severely reduced, the command judged that the risk was not worth it. As a result, he had to abandon his fellow infantrymen and retreat to the supply train of the division, where a team of techs tried to repair his suit as fast as possible. Sadly, they weren't fast enough. Who knew that a bunch of new gates would open, with one of them appearing almost on top of the scarcely defended supply train? While the techs and other non-combatants desperately tried to retreat closer to the main formation, Ash and a small number of soldiers that happened to be nearby had no choice but to face the advancing nightmare creatures alone. They unleashed a torrent of bullets at the monsters, but there were just too many of them. Even when he emptied his shoulder-mounted launcher to send a hail of miniature rockets into the mass of rabid abominations, the surprisingly potent explosive load his missiles carried failed to make any difference. He had managed to slaughter a number of dormant bastards with that salvo, but those of them that were awakened, you needed an awakened to kill another awakened. All mundane soldiers knew that, more or less. Slowly, Ash's blood turned cold in his veins. Bad, bad, bad. An officer's shout reached his ears through the communication system of the armor suit, barely legible because of all the distortion produced by the mass of gates. Tack bayonets. Attach bayonets. That was the order that every soldier dreaded. Ash resolutely pressed a button on the side of his rifle. A moment later, a powerful alloy blade slid from underneath its barrel, turning the weapon into an improvised spear. Come then, wretches. Despite his bravado, Ash felt more and more like he was not going to live to see the next day or whatever it was that counted as a day in the damned southern quadrant. The odds just seemed too slim. The awakened abominations were bad enough, but he at least had a theoretical chance to take down one or two with the help of his powered armor. But there were also fallen ones. Most terrifyingly of all, a creature that resembled a giant, ancient, rotting carcass of a monstrous deer had just emerged from the gate, sending the other ghastly beasts into a frenzy. It had to be a devil, at least, or maybe even a tyrant. Ash shuddered and readied himself. Well, so be it. We need to give the supply guys time to run. These bastards are going to learn what humans are capable of. Hell, who knows? Maybe reinforcements will arrive in time. In the next moment, the nightmare creatures closed in on the thin line of soldiers, making ranged fire useless. Ash caught a lunging dormant beast on the tip of his bayonet and grunted, feeling his powered armor suit being pushed back. Strong, the mini boosters on the back of the heavy exoskeleton ignited. Pushing him forward, Ash sliced through the flesh of the revolting creature, then tried to land a blow on another snarling abomination. Sadly, at that moment, the damaged joint of his armor finally gave out, throwing him off balance. The bayonet slid off the hide of the awakened monster, without leaving even a scratch on it. Ash helplessly toppled to the ground. Before he could move, sharp fangs closed on his shoulder, easily crushing the tempered alloy of his armor and the complicated internals of the powered suit. A terrible pain tore through his side. Die, I am going to die. He looked up and stared at the ugly snout of the monster that was going to kill him, his eyes wide. And then, the monster's head exploded into bloody chunks. Ash blinked as a visage out of a nightmare flashed past him. It was a black horse carrying a human rider that wore an intricate onyx armor. At least, the rider looked like a human. Or a demon, perhaps. It was the black steed's hoof that had crushed the nightmare creature's head. Without ever slowing down, the demonic knight continued forward, killing numerous abominations in passing. Suddenly, the pressure on the mundane soldiers reduced. The dark rider and his nightmarish steed flew through the mass of rabid creatures, slaughtering one after another. The sword. The knight wielded a strange weapon. The sword she, held was made out of black stone and broken. Its edge, however, was still sharp. As Ash struggled to stand up, the demonic knight tore through the onslaught of nightmare creatures, getting closer and closer to the monstrous deer. At some point, the rider gracefully jumped off the black steed's back, soaring high into the air and landing right in front of the charging guardian. Ash didn't see what happened next, because the figure of the infernal knight became hidden behind the mass of nightmare creatures. All he perceived was a chilling, absolutely inhuman shriek that suddenly rolled across the battlefield, so loud that the auditory systems of his exosuit failed to filter the deafening wail out. Gods. Finally, he managed to raise himself from the ground. The battle was still not over, in fact, it was only starting. Even though Ash would have to struggle to do anything with only one functioning leg and a torn shoulder that reduced the range of motion of his right arm, he was determined to do his part. Raising his rifle once again, he glanced forward and saw the dreadful black horse rampaging among the nightmare creatures. There was no sign of its demonic rider, but judging by the erratic movements of the giant deer-like monstrosity, the Onyx Knight was fighting it. Who was crazy enough to attack that horror alone? But the mysterious warrior did not just attack the terrifying gate guardian. Ash froze for a moment. Wait, did he? No. She did that demon, actually. The rotting body of the ghastly deer suddenly swayed and then toppled. Another shriek pierced Ash's ears, and then the mass of nightmare creatures seemed to lose most of its coordination. The gate guardian was dead. Ash couldn't believe his luck. And, as if fortune truly smiled on him today, not too long after the fearsome abomination fell, reinforcements arrived from behind, forging an impregnable defense line to stop the enemy's advance. Ash fired the last of his bullets, then stumbled away and retreated. This time, he was sent to the field hospital instead of a repair vehicle, to have his body tended to instead of his powered suit. There, wincing as his torn shoulder was hastily mended together, Ash frowned. Wait, that armor, that demonic aura, the cold indifference and dark charisma. His eyes suddenly widened. The battle still raged on, but Ash was utterly preoccupied by something else. Was I saved by Mongrel? Chapter 853, Bone Singer. This time, Sunny chose to dive into the melee from the very first moment of the battle. His bow was a fearsome tool to slay powerful targets from a distance, but now that the situation had come to a full-fledged frontal assault, restraining the horde of lesser nightmare creatures was more important. After all, they were only less than when compared to utterly terrifying abominations. Each was still a deadly threat. Plus, using the Death Dealer enchantment again was out of question. Not to mention that the value of the Dying Wish was vastly increased, considering that he was leading a good 100 of Awakened instead of a single cohort right now. Any ally who could see Sunny clash with the monsters would feel inspired to fight with renewed zeal and resolve. On the other hand, he was also facing an entire horde of nightmare creatures instead of a single swarm. That meant that the Dying Wish would make him the target of hundreds of frenzied abominations. Its power had also increased due to the fact that he had already killed dozens of enemies affected by the Death Wish enchantment in the previous 2 battles. Oh well, he would just have to manage, somehow. Sunny had already decided to go all out, but now, for the first time in a long time, he suddenly felt a dire lack of powerful tools at his disposal. He had always prided himself on how formidable and versatile his arsenal of memories was, but it seemed to have fallen behind the kinds of threats Sunny was facing these days. He didn't even have anything to arm Saint with. To his shame, her broken stone sword was deadlier than any melee weapon he possessed, except for the cruel sight. As a part of an ascended demon, the stone blade carried the power of an ascended weapon as well. Sadly, unlike taciturn Shadow herself, the sword had not shown any sign of being able to repair itself. Yet. Sunny was clad in the undying chain, wielded the cruel sight, and harnessed the power of the dying wish. He was also augmented by two of his shadows. Saint only had the broken oath, which she could not use recklessly while riding Nightmare. The black courser and his rider were empowered by one shadow each. Other than that, there was not much Sunny could employ to change the odds in his favor. Damn it, I really need more memories. What of the tools he did have, though? Kimmy, what do you see? His soldiers were his tools, too. Considering that the last powerful memory Sunny had found went to Kim, he hoped to get some results. There were just a dozen seconds left before they clashed with the enemy. The young woman lingered for a moment, and then said something that ignited a small flame in Sunny's heart. I see. These beasts are vulnerable to sonic attacks. Sunny had formed a similar suspicion after facing the eyeless abominations for the first time, but unsubstantiated suspicions were not something a good strategy could be built upon. Now, however, I bet it's their perception, has to be. He summoned the flute carved out of a strange emerald femur, the Bone Singer. This ascended memory of the third tier, which he had gained in the Red Colosseum, possessed 3 enchantments: Sonorous, Silenced, and Sepulchre Song. The first one allowed the flute to sing at various volumes. This was the enchantment Sunny had copied to the silver bell and the ordinary rock. The second allowed the flute to create a dome of silence around itself. The third one, Sunny had not been able to use it yet. It was supposed to raise the dead. However, one had to know how to actually play the flute to activate it, which Sunny did not. Additionally, the risen corpses would be murderous, wicked, and uncontrolled. The only way to command them and prevent them from attacking the summoner was to soothe them with a correct melody, which he had no way of knowing as well. In any case, Sunny was only interested in the sonorous enchantment right now. Commanding the flute to sing as loud as it could, he saturated it with his essence and then threw the bone instrument to luster. Play it. The young man caught the emerald flute and stared at it with a startled expression. But Captain, I have no idea how to. Sunny was already turning back to the tide of abominations. Just blow into the hole, damn it. Luster hesitated for half a second, then obediently brought the Bone Singer to his lips. A moment later, a deafening, discordant, ear-piercing whistle exploded from the flute, spreading far and wide. And just a moment before the flood of eyeless abominations crashed against the awakened, they suddenly stumbled and lost their momentum, as if severely disoriented. Sunny grinned as the cruel sight reaped the life of his first victim. The Bone Singer had not produced a sonic attack, per se. It was just terribly loud and hideously shrill. However, just like he had thought, that turned out to be enough. The beasts were blind, after all. They had to perceive the world through some other means, and their hearing had turned out to be the dominant one of those. If Sunny had to guess, he would have said that the long spikes on their backs were meant to sense sound waves spreading through the air, which the abominations were then able to interpret into a coherent picture of their surroundings. Subjecting them to the terrible song of the Bone Singer was akin to using a flashbang grenade. Without ever slowing down, Sunny cut into the horde of nightmare creatures. Driven into a murderous frenzy by the dying wish, hundreds of them rushed forward to tear him apart, only to die by his blade. Sunny had fully unleashed his powers. Dancing between the abominations like a dark deity, he slaughtered them without stop. Now that Sunny did not have to control the shape of the battlefield, he used shadow manifestation to enhance his own might. Dark tentacles rose from the ground to ensnare and rip his enemies apart. From time to time, 2 additional limbs appeared on his body, piercing the abominations or slicing their bodies with adamantine claws. The cruel sight shrieked like a banshee every time it cut the air over the years. Sunny had been subjected to all kinds of attacks and tortures. The dark mirror enchantment of the somber spear had long accumulated a vast library of elemental damage types. He had just never had a reason to use any except for divine flame and soul attacks. Things were different now. Soon piles of corpses and rivers of blood surrounded him. The more abominations attacked him, the more he was able to kill. The sight of the slaughter was both terrifying and eerily beautiful. The awakened detachment of the human division faced the onslaught of the nightmare creatures, shuddered, but managed to hold the horde off for a few precious minutes. Then, the mundane soldiers of the First Evacuation Army joined the fray. Supported by the destructive might of their high-tech armaments, The awakened changed their tactic and went on the offensive. Sunny led one of the charges, with his cohorts serving as the tip of the spear. Almost 100 warriors cut deep into the horde and moved to where the gate guardian was hiding. It was another fallen devil, similar to the one Sunny had killed a few hours before. This one, however, seemed slightly smaller and yet more powerful. It was a female. Stay back. As the distance to the dreadful abomination grew shorter, Sunny commanded his soldiers to keep away and dove through the shadows, appearing near the gate guardian. Once again, the creature's eyelids trembled, as if about to open. Somehow he knew that he would be in terrible danger if he ever looked into those eyes. Trusting his intuition, Sunny closed his own and dashed forward while relying entirely on shadow sense. A small lantern hanging from his belt suddenly came to life, and a flood of darkness shrouded everything around. In the embrace of shadows, Sunny suddenly felt a mortifying chill assault his senses. The defiled witness was looking at him. A moment later, a bright flash tore the darkness apart. Imbued with divine flame, the blade of the cruel sight drew a line across the abomination's neck, beheading it. As the decapitated corpse fell to its knees, the bestial head flew away, enveloped in white flames. Not long after that, the battle was finally over. Chapter 854, Perfect Alibi. What a day! Sunny tiredly dragged his body back to the rhino, wincing in disgust at all the bodies littering the ground. Why did nightmare creatures have to be so ugly? Why do you prefer to be surrounded by pretty corpses? That would probably be even worse. War was ugly. And maybe, just maybe, it was actually a redeeming quality. His soldiers followed him, just as exhausted. No one was seriously wounded, which was the best result Sunny could have hoped for. However, they were in no mood to speak. Other fighters of the First Army, however, felt differently. A buzz of voices surrounded them. The division was in the process of regrouping after the unexpectedly strenuous confrontation with not one, but two entire hordes of abominations. The logistics of the whole process were pure hell, which was only made worse by the strong interference produced by the gates. The gates in the immediate area around the human force, separated merely by a few kilometers each, there were now 14 of them. 7 had opened at some point in the past, and 7 more opened simultaneously just a few hours ago. The idea of something like that happening would have seemed preposterous before, but with the chain of nightmares descending upon the southern quadrant, nothing was impossible anymore. Sunny shook his head. At least he collected plenty of fragments today, as well as earning himself some reputation. Anyone who had seen him fight had to be impressed. And why wouldn't they be? Sunny had personally slain 3 gate guardians today. There was one problem, though. As he walked through the battlefield, he couldn't help but overhear bits and pieces of various conversations. Gam, these irregulars are no joke. Have you seen their captain? The man is a demon. I heard no. I saw him tear the head off a fallen devil's body with his bare hands. Wait, really? Although, now that I look at him, it's easy to believe. That giant guy with a sledgehammer, right? No, you idiot. The pale kid. You know, the one who looks like a haunted vintage doll. Man, who cares about some captain? Haven't you heard? Heard what? That gate behind us? Do you know who cleared it? It was Mongrel, Lord Mongrel himself. No way, he's in Antarctica. Sunny blinked. What? The more he listened to what the soldiers were talking about, the more he heard the damned nickname. Mongrel, Mongrel, Mongrel. Are they all insane? Sure. Saint's armor looked somewhat similar to the mantle of the underworld, but everything else was different. Firstly, and most importantly, she was clearly a woman while he was obviously a man. Secondly, his shadow wore her closed helmet instead of Weaver's mask. Who could mistake one for another? After thinking about it for a bit, however, Sunny came to a disturbing conclusion. He knew what Weaver's mask could do and why he wore it. People, however, did not. To them, the fearsome mask was just another memory, so it was perfectly natural that Mongrel would don a helmet instead of it before going into battle. Additionally, he doubted that anyone had gotten a good look at Saint. She was moving incredibly fast while galloping to the rear of the human formation, and then dove into a mass of nightmare creatures without ever slowing down. Whatever recording remained had to be of terrible quality, considering the disrupting effect of the gates. And speaking of recordings, as soon as they reached the Rhino, Sonny connected his communicator to the vehicle's powerful communications suite and accessed the network. Almost immediately, the sensational titles of several recent articles attracted his attention. A humble hero. After eschewing the allure of fame and avoiding the limelight for almost 2 years, renowned swordsman Mongrel appears in Antarctica to save 15,000 soldiers from certain doom. Guardian Angel of Humanity. True to his word, Lord Mongrel, who once proclaimed that he was just a human, courageously puts his life at risk to protect the human race. Exclusive footage of Lord Mongrel vanquishing a fallen tyrant. Lord Mongrel confirmed to be a lady. Sonny silently covered his face with a hand. Gods, that was fast. The government propaganda machine must have decided that Lord Mongrel, whoever he might be, was a good tool to prop up the current recruitment efforts. A somewhat hot celebrity appearing on the battlefield was a good tool to inspire more people to enlist. His face turned a little bitter. I killed 3 whole gate guardians, damn it. 3. Saint only killed 1, and even then, it was with the help of Nightmare. Why is no one speaking about me? Even the soldiers of his division seemed to have completely forgotten about Sonny's contributions once the news of Mongrel appearing during the battle spread. Not that Sonny wanted to be recognized for anything. In fact, he vastly preferred being a complete unknown. But still, with a sigh, he looked up the recordings uploaded to the network. Just as he had expected, the quality was terrible. Saint looked like a blurry black silhouette with no definable features. What little the government allowed to be shown did not paint a clear picture of her clash against the nightmare creatures. It just looked like a mess of movement accompanied by a litany of bestial howls. However, that only added fuel to the collective imagination of people who had watched the video. He read a few of the discussions and closed his eyes for a moment, holding back a groan. What is this crap? From what people were saying, it seemed as if Mongrel single-handedly eradicated several thousands of nightmare creatures, while actual soldiers helplessly stood back and applauded. Suddenly, Sonny let out a small laugh. Before unleashing Saint, he had been worried that people would connect the dots and realize that he was Mongrel. Reality, however, turned out to be the exact opposite. Thousands of humans had witnessed him fight at the front of the formation, while at the same time, thousands more had seen someone who they mistakenly assumed to be Mongrel fight at the back. The two couldn't possibly be the same. The action that could have potentially revealed his secret had become a perfect alibi instead. Sonny sighed and then shook his head in bewilderment. Well, that's something, I guess. Chapter 855: Snow and Ash. There were a lot of things to do before the division resumed its march. Soul shards had to be extracted from the carcasses of the nightmare creatures. The carcasses themselves had to be piled into mounds to clear the way for the vehicles. Usually, each would have been dressed to harvest useful materials. The hides and bones of the abominations were a precious resource, especially that of the fallen ones. However, no one had time to properly process the remains of the fearsome horde, so the corpses were simply discarded by the side of the road, doused in incendiary liquid, and burned. The transports and artillery vehicles, damaged war platforms, and powered suits of mechanized infantry had to be checked and repaired. Spent ammunition had to be replaced, wounded had to be healed. Soldiers, both mundane and awakened, needed time to rest and recover. Aboard the Rhino, members of the cohort slept in shifts. 3 entered the dream realm, while the other 3 remained on guard. As soon as the first shift returned, the second shift took their place inside the sleeping pod. Sonny remained awake, meditating silently at the back of the vehicle. In the morning, the division had to perform one final task. In a solemn silence, the bodies of the fallen soldiers, about 100 or so, were covered by pristine white flags. The general in command of the division gave a short speech, and then lowered his head. After that, several war platforms towering above him activated powerful flamethrowers attached to their mechanical arms, unleashing long streams of furious fire to consume the bodies. In the harsh conditions of the Antarctic campaign, the First Army could not give its fallen a better burial. Even if the division could spare time to dig graves in the frozen soil, the risk of a stray nightmare creature disturbing them in the future was too high. And with so many living people waiting for their turn to board the evacuation ships, sacrificing precious space to send the bodies back home was a luxury that no one could afford. Looking at the funeral pyre in silence, Sunny couldn't help but fall into a somber mood. Although the ritual itself was beautiful and dignified, in truth, the soldiers who had sacrificed their lives were treated not much different from the nightmare creatures that had killed them. In the end, both were consumed by flames. For some reason, the image of countless candles burning in front of the academy gates appeared in his mind. With a sigh, Sunny turned away and spoke to his subordinates. "Let's go. At least the losses weren't too terrible. If Saint had not struck down the guardian of the northernmost gate so swiftly, things could have been much worse." Soon the division moved forward. All that was left behind was a landscape decimated by the battle, with snow and ash mixing as they swirled in the air. Sunny remained at the back of the rhino with a contemplative expression on his face. Soon, however, he was distracted from his thoughts by an incoming communication. Master Jet's alabaster face appeared on the screen. "Sunny, I have a new mission for you." The field army dispatched to the Antarctic Center had a straightforward objective: turn a small number of cities into impregnable strongholds, relocate all human population of the region to these strongholds, and then entrench themselves for as long as it was going to take to evacuate everyone. At some point, reinforcements were supposed to arrive and make the task of withstanding the siege of nightmare creatures easier. Before that happened, however, the First Army had to complete the most perilous stage of the operation alone. Siege capitals had to be built, evacuation corridors had to be established, and millions of people had to be moved through them in a timely fashion. All of that demanded the human forces to be split into numerous smaller detachments, which posed a significant risk. Additionally, there were too many moving parts to this plan, and each of them could fail and end in disaster. Right now, the division Sunny was assigned to was swiftly moving toward a large city that was going to become an entrenched stronghold. In the process, they were also laying the groundwork to establish transportation connections to smaller settlements, either by bolstering the existing civilian infrastructure or creating their own. After yesterday's battle, there seemed to be no serious obstacles in the division's path. Some of the other divisions, however, were not faring that well. Soul Reaper seemed a bit tired as she spoke from the screen. "A bit of a problem. There is a Category 3 gate blocking their way, guarded by a powerful, corrupted creature. From the initial observation, it is at least a devil, however, it could also be a tyrant. Winter can't handle it alone. You and I are the closest, so buckle up. Separate from your division and move southeast at full speed until you reach the rendezvous point. It's about 70 kilometers away from your current position." Sunny briefly studied the map, then said hesitantly, "A corrupted tyrant. Are you sure that the three of us can manage killing it?" All corrupted abominations were frightening. But a tyrant, the thought of facing one in battle made Sunny feel ill at ease. He had only ever fought one creature of that rank, the Wormvine. Even then, he had only killed the vile monster by slaying its host with the Aedra's wooden knife. Of course, Sunny had been a mere awakened back then. He was much more powerful now. But what truly disturbed him was the lack of information. Fighting an enemy after studying it for a while was completely different from going in blind. He probably had a slim chance against a corrupted tyrant if there was ample time to prepare. As it stood, though, Master Jet did not seem to share his concerns. She grinned darkly and then shook her head. "The three of us is enough. However, this time we won't be fighting alone. Someone else will be joining the fun." Sunny raised an eyebrow. "Who?" Soul Reaper leaned forward a little. "A saint." Chapter 856, Alien Landscape. The first evacuation army was accompanied by 3 saints. One was loyal to the government, while the other two had been sent by the great clans. Unofficially, Valor and Song had refused to participate in the Southern Quadrant campaign. Officially, however, they still had to keep up appearances. For that reason, each had provided a token force to support the evacuation effort, and the 2 saints in question were in charge of these forces. Sunny did not know who these transcendents were. All he knew was that the government had wisely chosen to separate them, sending one to East Antarctica, while the other ended up in the Antarctic Center. And now, apparently, that latter was coming to aid the irregulars in vanquishing a powerful, corrupted abomination. He was not sure how to feel about that. On one hand, the help of a saint was more than welcomed. On the other hand, one of the reasons he had decided to participate in the Antarctica campaign was to get away from the great clans and their machinations. Now, it seemed that he just couldn't escape coming in contact with the sovereigns and their forces. Curse it all. With a sigh, Sonny sent Luster the coordinates of the rendezvous point and walked over to the pilot's cabin. "We have new orders. Get to this location as fast as possible." The young man yawned, studied the coordinates for a bit, and then nodded. "Aye, sir." He lingered for a moment. By the way, what's there?" Sonny shrugged with a nonchalant expression. "A corrupted tyrant? Something like that." Luster paled, stared at him with wide eyes, and suddenly grew very quiet. Rhino left the marching formation of the division and accelerated forward, quickly overtaking slower vehicles. Then it made a sharp turn, left the wide highway entirely, and entered uneven terrain. Its massive wheels easily rolled through mud and rocks. Thanks to the high-tech suspension system, the members of the cohort barely felt any disturbance. In the next several hours, the armored vehicle briskly traversed the wild expanse of the Antarctic Center. Powerful spotlights installed on the Rhino's roof flooded the landscape in front of it with stark light, cutting the dimness with wide beams. Various sensors supplied Luster with additional information to better steer the heavy carrier. The Antarctic Center was very different from the wilderness of Asia that Sonny had seen during his brief train ride. It was just as lifeless, but in a different manner. There were fewer signs of past wars and disasters here, but at the same time, the land somehow seemed even more desolate. It was much more uneven and mountainous, too. Basically, most of the landmass was covered by a vast mountain chain. Because of that, the horizon was obscured most of the time, and it was hard to notice any approaching threats. More than that, the landscape itself looked strange and alien. Well, no surprise. After all, Antarctica had been covered by ice for millions of years, and only recently shrugged off its heavy veil. The passing of monumental glaciers had left many strange things behind. The Rhino was doing an amazing job of navigating the complicated terrain. It moved toward the rendezvous point with sufficient speed, sometimes making use of existing roads, sometimes cutting through untouched wilderness. It climbed or descended tall hills and mountain outcroppings, traversed stretches of frozen marshlands, and waded through labyrinths of giant boulders with equal ease. If there was one thing that kept Sonny tense, it was that he rarely had an opportunity to see far ahead. These days, the southern quadrant was not as lifeless as it had used to be. The life that was spreading through its reaches, however, was not the kind anyone in the waking world would welcome. Eventually, he sighed and climbed on the Rhino's roof through one of the upper hatches. Since Samara was yet to return from the dream realm, Sonny was the only member of the cohort with decent means of ranged attack. Using the open lid of the hatch to shield himself from the cold winds, Sonny summoned Morgan's warbow and peered into the dimness that surrounded the moving vehicle. In the next few hours, he had to use his bow 3 times. Several stray abominations wandered into the Rhino's path, only to be slain by a swift black arrow before having the chance to approach it. Luckily, none of them turned out to be too powerful or laid a dangerous ambush. For now, by noon, which of course looked the same as morning, evening, and night, the Rhino reached the ruins of a small outpost where 2 similar carriers were parked in the shadow of a broken wall. A handful of people could be seen gathered around a fire, having a cozy meal. As Luster stopped the vehicle, Sonny jumped off the roof and walked toward the fire. Orange light gleamed, reflecting from the bleak metal of his armor. "What are you guys drinking?" The members of Queen's and Soul Reaper's cohort looked at him with wistful expressions. Just hot water, sir. The cargo capacity of our carriers is limited, so we couldn't bring anything better." He shook his head, then summoned the covetous coffer. As the large chest manifested itself into reality and opened its toothy maw, Sonny thrust his hand inside and then threw a can of instant coffee and an expensive chocolate bar to the startled awakened. "Oh, sir, thank you, sir." The bunch of irregulars did not look like people who were about to fight a corrupted abomination of a high class. They seemed relaxed and nonchalant about the whole ordeal, and paid more attention to the can of coffee than to a menacing mountain that loomed above them. The Category 3 gate was situated on its peak. As the grateful awakened brewed coffee for themselves and Sunny's soldiers, who emerged from the Rhino and joined them, he looked around and noticed Master Jet and Winter. The two were standing some distance away, discussing something between themselves in low voices. He headed toward them and caught the tail end of their conversation. "Is definitely a woman. Hot as hell, too. I am telling you, idiot, I saw that mongrel guy myself once. He's definitely a man. Everyone knows that you're blind in both eyes when it comes to these things, Reaper. I mean, remember the time when that handsome saint tried to hit on you? What are you talking about? He was just hoping to cooperate with us to claim a new citadel. Damn. You are hopeless, you know that? All men." At that moment, Sunny approached them, glanced at Master Jet, and then cleared his throat. Winter stared at him for a moment. "See, case in point. What is that supposed to mean?" As Sunny pondered what she alluded to, Master Jet smiled and waved at him. "Ah, Sunny, you're just on time. The saint should be arriving any moment now, too." He couldn't help but frown. Who exactly is? At that moment, a vaguely familiar feeling suddenly overwhelmed him. Sunny sensed a massive shadow covering the ruined outpost, and then heard a sound that resembled the rustle of 1,000 wings. Suddenly, a fourth figure was standing among them. Sunny blinked, momentarily lost for words. Saint Tyrus? What are you doing here?" In front of him stood none other than Sky Tide of the White Feather Clan. Chapter 857, Jade Beetle. The woman standing in front of Sunny was tall and slender, with long hair that fell down in a gentle cascade of pale gold. Her posture was perfectly straight, and her cold face was dazzlingly beautiful. Skytide was wearing a suit of light steel armor, with pauldrons and greaves decorated with stylized feathers. The gaze of her stern amber eyes was piercing and heavy, while her strange vertical pupils resembled that of a bird of prey. Snowflakes swirled and danced in the air, as if trying to get closer to her. Sunny was rather startled to see the familiar transcendent. "Saint Tyrus, what are you doing here?" Sky Tide glanced at him. "Master Sunless, it is good to see you again. I am glad to find you in good health. As for why I am here, isn't it obvious? I have come to hunt the beast." He shifted awkwardly. "No, I meant why are you here, in Antarctica?" She stared at him expressionlessly. White Feather Clan has been tasked with supporting the evacuation effort in the southern quadrant. Oh, suddenly a few things clicked into place. Back when Skytide had killed Saint Cormac to protect Sunny and Cassie, she told them that she would be punished by the great clan Valor. She had also told them that they would not dare to penalize her too severely. It seemed that having the chained isles taken away was not enough of a punishment for the willful saint. Valor had to make a gesture by sending a token force to Antarctica, and so the White Feather Clan had drawn the short straw. It seemed that they had lost their idyllic demesnes and were banished to the cold reaches of the war-torn continent, at least for the time being. Looking around, Sunny suppressed a sad sigh. The dark and inhospitable land surrounding them was a far cry from the Empyrean beauty of the sanctuary of Noctis. He felt a bit guilty about the whole thing. Skytide did not seem to mind, though, or at least hid her displeasure perfectly. Master Jet, meanwhile, looked at them with curiosity. "Ah, I have forgotten that the two of you know each other. In any case, we are grateful for your assistance, Saint Tyrus." Skytide simply nodded. Soon, the gaze of her striking amber eyes drifted to the tall mountain looming above the ruined outpost. "What do we know about the enemy?" Soul Reaper shook her head slightly. "Not much." Then, she smiled and looked at the youngest member of the group. "Yet. Sunny, do your thing. Do your thing. Do your thing." "What kind of request is that?" As Sunny grumbled silently, his shadows nimbly scaled the slopes of the mountain. By now, the range of shadow control had exceeded 12 kilometers, so it was not impossible for them to reach the peak. There was hardly anyone better suited to spy on the corrupted abomination. However, Sunny grimaced as the call of the nightmare assaulted his mind. Now that he was observing a Category 3 gate, its subtle influence grew much stronger and harder to ignore. There was a wide crack that had almost split the peak of the mountain in two. The dark rift of the gate pulsed inside the cavernous schism, and there was stone debris littering the immediate area around it. Many shards had rolled down the steep slopes, while a few giant boulders had even reached all the way down, smashing large parts of the outpost the irregulars were currently hiding in and decimating the road that led to it. Strangely, he did not notice the nightmare creatures immediately. It was only after the creepy shadow, true to its name, crept closer that a sudden shiver ran through his body. Sonny noticed hundreds of shapes resting between the rocks. The abominations were easy to miss because their carapaces were as white as the snow covering the top of the mountain, and had a texture that resembled rock. They looked like giant insects that were as large as adult humans. Some of them were awakened, some were fallen, and a few larger ones were even corrupted. None of them could compare to the enormous abomination hiding in the shadow of the shattered peak. However, with its smooth, milky white chitin and unmoving black eyes, the jade creature resembled an oversized, appalling, monstrous beetle. It was easily 3 times the size of the rhino, with 6 mighty legs and terrifying mandibles that seemed powerful enough to crush heavily armored war platforms. Looking at the motionless abomination, Sonny suddenly felt an eerie sense of foreboding. He glanced at St. Tyrus, Master Jet, and Winter with a dark expression. It's a tyrant, all right. Large, thick armor, resembles an insect. There are around 500 drones under its command, many of them fallen. I've noticed at least 24 corrupted lieutenants as well. He lingered for a moment and then called out, "Kimmy." The seer of his cohort activated her aspect ability, allowing him to see the swarm of stone beetles in a new light. Studying their tough carapaces, Sonny slowly listed a few vulnerable points, then shifted his gaze to the tyrant. Unlike its minions, the giant white beetle did not seem to possess any pronounced weak spots. Sonny did not know whether the armor of the powerful creature was that good, or whether Kim simply could not peer through the defenses of an enemy that outranked and outclassed her so much, but the result was the same. Killing the tyrant was not going to be easy. He shared what little information he had been able to gather, and glanced at the other officers with doubt. "So, what do we do now?" St. Tyrus remained silent, but Master Jet smiled. Her smile was dark and vicious. "What else? We kill it." Sonny blinked. "How?" Soul Reaper waited for a few moments, then looked at Sky Tide. The Transcendent crossed her arms. "I will handle the tyrant. As long as it's bound to the ground, I can attack the creature with impunity. If 1 attack doesn't crack its shell, 10 will. If 10 attacks fail, 100 will do the job." She looked at the irregulars and frowned. "However, you will have to deal with its retinue. That task is not going to be easy." Winter snorted and then suddenly laughed. "Easy? What's that?" Chapter 858, Aerial Superiority. They did not spend too much time trying to come up with a detailed plan. Firstly, because the nightmare creatures could have discovered the irregulars at any moment. Secondly, because no plan they could come up with would have been reliable. There was just too little information at their disposal. Without knowing what the tyrant, the few devils serving it, and the lesser soldiers of the Stone Hive were capable of, what was the point of creating rigid strategies? The battle ahead was going to be decided by raw power, resolve, and ability to swiftly adapt to changing circumstances. Luckily, the irregulars had more than enough power at their disposal. With 3 elite masters and an actual saint leading them, there was hardly a more fearsome human force in the Antarctic Center. Would that power be enough, though? They were going to find out soon. How did I end up here? Creeping up the slope of the mountain with a morose expression, Sonny bitterly remembered his dreams of becoming a rich, decadent, cowardly shop owner. What was he doing on a continent drowning in nightmare gates, preparing to battle a corrupted tyrant and its army? He could have been relaxing in the hot springs of a luxurious spa with a bunch of beauties right now. That was what rich people did, right? Instead, Sonny hid behind a tall boulder, shivered in the cold, and glanced at the handful of people pressing against rocks around him. Sure, there were plenty of beauties among them as well. But it wasn't the same. It couldn't be more different, really. Damn. There was still a good stretch of the mountain slope remaining until the peak. That high, the air was not devoid of oxygen yet, but it surely tasted different. None of the awakened would be hindered by the slight hypoxia, or suffer from the high-altitude illness, of course, but it still required some adjustment. Sunny sighed and watched as St. Tyrus calmly walked forward. A swarm of sparks surrounded her hand, and then coalesced into a long javelin. At the same time, Winter summoned a strange silver bow and 2 arrows. She knocked one on the string of the bow and waited. A shadow hiding at the peak of the mountain watched as one of the hideous insects wandered to the edge of a protruding rock outcropping and froze, its long antennae twitching in the wind. Sunny frowned. I think we're noticed." Before he could warn anyone, however, Skytide took one last step, raised her javelin, and silently threw it into the dark sky. Her throw caused the snow around St. Tyrus to be cleared away by the gale of crushing wind. The rocks beneath her feet cracked. In the next moment, a thunderous roar of a sonic boom rolled across the mountains as the javelin accelerated toward the peak with terrifying speed. It streaked across the sky like a radiant star and then collided against the tyrant's carapace with devastating force. The milky white chitin did not shatter, though. The javelin shattered instead. As St. Tyrus tilted her head a little, Winter shot an arrow almost straight up. It flew into the sky and then exploded with brilliant radiance, flooding the gloomy slope with bright light. Illuminated by it, the nightmare creatures hiding behind the rocks moved. They ran forward with surprising agility and then jumped, twisting their bodies into tight spheres. Hundreds of these spheres then rolled down, approaching the hiding irregulars with terrible speed. Sunny felt his heart growing heavy. Because of how similar the carapaces of the stone hive soldiers were to actual rock, it seemed as if the mountain itself was falling on them. And that wasn't all. The tyrant moved forward and opened its maw, disgorging a cloud of darkness from it. The cloud flowed down like an avalanche of volcanic ash, swallowing the figures of rolling drones as it overtook them. Bad. Sunny did not know what the black avalanche consisted of, but his intuition was screaming that inhaling, or even being touched by the black ash, was deadly to humans. At that moment, Skytide suddenly disappeared, and a massive shape shot forward from their formation. A giant bird of prey with white feathers and talons forged of lustrous steel appeared above the mountain, gaining speed as it flew into the sky. Her body was wreathed in a radiant mantle of dancing lightning bolts. As St. Tyrus moved her enormous wings, the cloud of black ash was torn apart by the hurricane winds and dissipated long before reaching the irregulars. She soared high into the dim sky and then plummeted down, aiming to savage the jade beetle with her terrifying beak. The 2 monstrous creatures collided, and the tyrant jumped back with an ear-piercing screech. A beam of darkness escaped from its maw, but Skytide was already rising into the sky as she circled to deliver another devastating attack. The bolts of lightning gathered on her body and then shot forward, colliding with the dark beam. It seemed to weaken considerably and missed the swift saint, disappearing into the somber expanse of cold heavens. A net of lightning descended from above and bit into the milky white jade chitin of the tyrant. A devastating thunderclap battered it like a physical attack. Tyrus folded her wings and fell down again, leaving deep grooves on the enemy's armor with her talons. The whole mountain shook from the ferocious force of their clash. Comparatively uninjured, but hopelessly outmatched by the flying opponent, the jade beetle seemed almost aggrieved. Its black eyes stared at the silhouette of the colossal bird with an indescribable, inhuman emotion. And then, the tyrant straightened. Its carapace suddenly seemed to split in the middle and move aside like a giant gate. From beneath it, 4 long, translucent wings emerged and then blurred, causing the massive creature to rise into the air. It would have been an eerily beautiful image, if it wasn't so dreadful. Looking from below, Sunny gritted his teeth. Well, crap. Chapter 859 Summit. The corrupted tyrant and Skytide were of the same rank, but there was an abyss of 4 entire classes separating them. Nevertheless, St. Tyrus had been confident in her ability of defeating the perverse creature. As long as it was bound to the ground, that was what she had told them. Watching the giant insect spread its 4 translucent wings and soar into the somber sky, both grotesque and eerily beautiful at the same time. Sunny froze for a moment. Then he looked back down. Nothing ever went according to plan. That was just the reality of things, and the irregulars had been prepared to face unforeseen circumstances from the very start. St. Tyrus was going to have to manage, somehow on her own. The rest of them had their own trial to face. He couldn't spare attention to the titanic battle happening above. Hundreds of nightmare creatures were bearing down upon the three cohorts of irregulars like an avalanche. Contracted into balls of white chitin, the soldiers of the stone hive were rolling down the mountain slope with tremendous speed, all their vulnerable spots safely protected. Their advance could be easily seen in the light of winter's radiant arrow. Among them were awakened, fallen, and even corrupted abominations, beasts, monsters, demons, and even devils. The air this close to the summit of the mountain was cold and thin, and unlike the previous battle, humans held an unfavorable position below the enemy. Worse still, Sunny had yet to recover from yesterday's exertion. He had barely half of his essence left. Saint and Nightmare were mending themselves in the dark flames of his soul after the clash with the powerful Gate Guardian. Things weren't looking good. Whatever. More fragments for me. As he thought that, Winter sent a second arrow into the sky. It disappeared into the darkness and then seemed to explode into 1,000 brilliant shards. Her aspect was a strange one. From what Sunny knew, it combined some sort of powerful combat augmentation with an affinity to revelation. Winter was both a warrior and a seer. As a result, she never missed. That was not an exaggeration, just a frightening and bizarre fact. She had literally never missed a shot since becoming an awakened. It did not matter what weapon Winter used, be it a bow, a sling, a throwing dagger, or simply a rock. They always struck true. Of course, simply being able to hit the target did not always mean victory. What made her truly formidable was an extensive arsenal of enchanted arrows that she had accumulated over the years. Master Winter was basically a walking artillery unit. As the 1,000 brilliant shards rained from the sky, each revealed itself to look like a small silver arrow. They bit into the mass of rolling abominations, shredding their carapaces and finding their way through the smallest cracks in the chitin armor. Instantly, fetid blue lymph flowed onto the snow-covered rocks. A moment later, another arrow was already nocked on the string of Winter's bow, with several more already manifesting themselves from a whirlwind of sparks. Each appeared exactly as the previous one was sent flying. Shooting the bow with unnatural speed, she unleashed a squall of death on the mass of descending nightmare creatures. Every arrow was unique, but absolutely deadly. Studying the nimble, calculated, and lethal movements of the older master, Sunny couldn't help but sigh. So that's what a professional looks like. He had a long way to go if he hoped to reach this realm of archery. Soon, the other ranged fighters among the irregulars joined the fray. Almost all members of Winter's own cohort were sharpshooters of some kind, so it easily outshone the rest in this phase of the battle, reaping dozens of abominable lives. Often, the awakened marksman aimed at the breaches in the white carapaces that the rain of arrows summoned by Winter had created. As blue runes ignited on the silver limbs of her bow, she grinned, "Show them hell. Whoever kills the most gets a hug. Haha." The information about the weak spots of the Stonehive soldiers that Kim and Sunny had provided also helped. Soon he heard a familiar electric whine and saw a powerful explosion bloom among the abominations, ripping a few of them apart. Samara was adding her prodigal firepower to the deadly onslaught of the ranged specialists. Sunny, however, restrained himself from using a bow. In this battle he needed to conserve his essence as much as possible. Plus, he was meant to play a different role. The tide of abominations was almost upon them. Sunny. He turned around and saw Master Jet running at him. Her short raven black hair was dancing in the wind, and her eyes were burning with chilling blue light. There was a light armor of black leather wrapped tightly around her body, and a familiar dark glaive trailing behind her. Lowering himself slightly, he interlocked his fingers and offered his hands to her as a step. As soon as Soul Reaper's foot landed in this cradle, he strained his muscles and threw her into the air. Augmented by 3 shadows, his strength was nothing short of monstrous. Boosted by Sunny, Jet flew forward as if she was an arrow herself. The somber glaive flashed, cutting no, passing through the body of one of the corrupted abominations before it could even react. The creature rolled forward with tremendous speed for a few more moments, but then suddenly convulsed, unfurled its massive body, and came to a shuddering stop. Its white carapace was perfectly whole, with not even a smallest crack on it, and yet the massive beast was dead. As Soul Reaper slid on the icy rocks, hundreds of abominations attacked the line of irregulars and the swift human who had managed to kill one of their leaders. The massive balls of white chitin instantly unfurled into terrifying insect-like abominations and lunged at their victims, their sharp mandibles clicking and their segmented legs scraping against the stones. Master Jet was already moving, dodging numerous attacks as she dashed toward the next corrupted target. Looking at her, Sunny blinked. Fast. Then, he had no more time to think. Chapter 860 Stone Hive. Even though the archers managed to kill and wound a lot of nightmare creatures, there were still enough of them left to bury the irregulars under a mass of chitinous bodies. Master Jet's sudden advance divided their attention and lessened the pressure on the rest of the human force, but that was not her primary goal. In this battle, Soul Reaper was tasked with the most important objective: eliminating the corrupted abominations that threatened to wipe out the awakened soldiers. Awakened were supposed to fight nightmare creatures of their own rank. Facing a fallen abomination was usually a recipe for disaster, and only a small amount of human warriors could be confident in defeating an overbearing foe like that. Killing a creature of a higher rank was a rare enough accomplishment that it could substantially change one's reputation. Still, it was not impossible. Sunny himself, as well as every other survivor of the Forgotten Shore, had slain plenty of beings that they had no business fighting. That was what made them so abnormal in the terrible crucible of the Forgotten Shore. Only the strongest of the strongest survived. Of course, there were plenty of equal talents among the rest of the awakened, and the elites chosen to become irregulars were among them. But they stood no chance against the corrupted. The power gap of 2 ranks was just too insurmountable. In the rarest of circumstances, a victory could still be possible, but usually awakened would not even be able to leave a scratch on the bodies of these monsters. No conventional weapon could harm them either. That was why the corrupted lieutenants of the Stone Hive had to die first. Considering that these revolting insects possessed immensely durable armor, Soul Reaper had been chosen to strike them down. Her dreadful aspect, after all, allowed her to ignore all forms of physical protection. That did not mean that the rest of the irregulars were going to get it easy. Even without the strongest abominations, the rest of the hive was more than capable of tearing the few humans apart unless humans destroyed them first. This time, the terrain they had to fight on did not give the irregulars any advantages. They could not create a layered formation where melee fighters held the enemies off in the front, while the archers pelted them with arrows from the back. The small human force was destined to be instantly surrounded. That was where Sunny came in. Most of the irregulars created a defensive line slightly higher up the slope, while the ranged specialists continued to shoot arrows and other projectiles over their heads. Their line bent like a crescent moon so that the abominations could not attack them from the sides. He alone stood behind the formation, holding the cruel sight and breathing deeply. Sunny's task was simple: to not let even a single nightmare creature attack the human force from the back. Let's go. The tide of Stone Hive soldiers broke against the single blade of Soul Reaper's glaive, collided against the defensive line of irregulars, and spilled over it. He saw a mass of abominations slide past him from the sides, slow down, then turn around and scurry back up the slope. His fourth shadow had just returned and wrapped itself around the blade of the cruel sight, and at the same time the dying wish called the enemy's fourth. Sunny dashed forward with stunning speed. At the same time, the shadows around him seethed, and then exploded forward with 4 long and powerful tentacles. Each tentacle pierced the carapace of a nightmarish insect and tore its body apart. A moment later, the cruel sight shone with furious white light and slid into a thin crack between the thorax and the head of a fallen abomination, turning its soft innards and brain into ash. Sunny twisted his spear, decapitating the appalling creature. To his surprise, even without its head, the insect continued forward, trying to skewer him with 2 of its long, segmented legs. With a startled snarl, Sunny crashed into it with his shoulder and sent the heavy monster flying back like a cannonball. At the same time, his shadow tentacles twisted and shot forward, breaking the legs of several more abominations. Bastards, do you really think you can touch me? Pathetic bugs like you can never hope to kill a noble cockroach like me. Suddenly, a mad smile appeared on his face. Grinning like a lunatic, Sunny spun in the growing tide of stone hive soldiers, killing them one after another. After the Red Colosseum, it was not hard for him to shadow nightmare creatures. Even though bestial abominations like these did not possess sentience, let alone refined battle techniques, they still had unique instincts, behavioral patterns, and character. As such, he could mirror and predict their attacks just as well as that of humans. In fact, it was much easier, but also much, much harder. It was not difficult to peer into the essence of their ferocious combat instincts and adopt them, but doing so put him in terrible peril. It was hard to not lose himself. It was hard to remain human. Luckily, there was an anchor that held that which made Sunny a person together, his true name. Lost from light. With its help, he could always return from the formless depths of shadow dance, no matter how far he dove into its strange embrace. Stone-like chitin cracked and shattered. Blue lymph shot into the air. Broken mandibles and segmented limbs rolled away, severed by the ruthless blade of the cruel sight. For now, Sunny managed to prevent any nightmare creatures from getting past him. Most fell into a murderous frenzy because of the dying wish and aimed to kill him and no one else, and the few that managed to shrug the effect off were dragged back and killed by the long and malleable shadow tentacles. There were more and more abominations attacking him, though, and among them, much more powerful creatures suddenly appeared. An ominous feeling brushed against Sunny's mind. What the hell? He could have sworn that an especially large insect had been barreling toward him just a moment ago. 4 tumorous growths of darkness within its body revealed that the giant abomination was a fallen devil. But now, it was gone. Where is it? Before Sunny could find an answer, the mountain slope beneath his feet suddenly split open, and from it, a hungry maw appeared, too close and swift for him to escape. Chapter 861 Entombed. The ground split open, and the head of a massive insect appeared from beneath. Sunny was thrown off balance, and much worse, there was no time for him to dodge the sudden attack. He could not even use Shadow Step. Crap! Before he could do anything, the maw of the fallen devil closed around one of his legs. Sharp mandibles scraped against his greave, smearing revolting mucus all over the bleak steel of the undying chain. The good news was that his transcendent armor turned out to be too tough to be bitten through by the damned abomination. No matter how hard the creature pressed with its jaws, the armored greave refused to bend or be pierced. It also withstood the corrosive effect of the liquid oozing from the insect's maw. Perhaps things would have been different if Sunny did not possess such a high divine affinity. But with the brilliant will enchantment reinforcing his armor, it reached a stupendous level of durability. The bad news, however, was that Sunny was completely immobilized. Even if the fallen devil could not bite off his leg, there were countless other abominations that were already dashing forward to press the attack and rip him apart. Every armor had its cracks, and the undying chain was no different. "Let go, you filthy bug." Sunny reversed his grip on the cruel sight and thrust it down. His strike was so powerful that the incandescent blade pierced all the way through the impregnable chitin of the insect, cracking the thick plate protecting its forehead and melting parts of it away. Despite the terrible wound, the devil refused to die. Even with its listless black eyes turning into liquid and evaporating, it rose from the ground and then viciously jerked the upper part of his torso, swinging Sunny into the ground. No matter how tough his armor was at this point, human bones would have snapped and shattered. However, Bone Weave stubbornly held his femur and tibia together. It hurt like hell, though. Arg. Slamming into the rocks, Sunny stubbornly thrust his spear deeper into the devil's head and then briefly glanced at the approaching soldiers of the stone hive. Following his command, the shadow tentacles shot forward and crushed a few closest ones. At the same time, 2 dark hands appeared from his lower torso and grabbed the devil's jaws, trying to pry them apart. It was of no use. The creature was just too strong. The fallen devil possessed a wicked intelligence, too. Seeing that neither its bite nor its slam managed to damage the thorny opponent, it decided to change tactics. Instead of trying to savage the enemy, the giant insect simply clenched its jaw tighter and then dove into the ground, pulling Sunny with it. The solid stone parted around them like liquid. Not good. Like every human, Sunny harbored a deeply rooted fear of being buried alive. And this was exactly what was happening. Pulled dozens of meters into the solid stone, he was going to be buried under its crushing weight if the devil let go. Perhaps that was exactly the bastard's plan. Before that could happen, however, Sunny snarled and thrust the cruel sight even deeper, pushing it into the body of the devil as far as he could. At the same time, he commanded the spear to assume its maximum length and then sent all 4 of his shadows from his body onto the somber blade. Augmented by them, the divine flame summoned by the dark mirror enhancement suddenly grew even hotter. For a moment, it seemed as though the giant insect became illuminated from within. A blinding light escaped from the cracks of its carapace, and then the devil contorted in a terrible convulsion. Just a few seconds later, it was immolated from within, turning into nothing but an empty blackened shell. You have slain a fallen devil. Stone Titan flee. Your shadow grows stronger. Sunny shuddered, feeling his heart turn cold. That's great. But the devil was dead, and so its unnatural power dissipated. The stone surrounding them turned back into its solid state, encasing Sunny in a cold, inescapable coffin. There was no light, no room to move, no air to breathe. Even with a master's prodigious might, digging himself out was impossible. A creeping horror entered Sunny's mind. Luckily, he was not just any master. Stretching his shadow sense upward, Sunny simply used Shadow Step and emerged from a stretch of darkness above ground. The cold air of Antarctica had never felt so sweet. The inhospitable, dim sky had never looked so beautiful. Suppressing the desire to fall to his knees and take a gasping breath, Sunny swiftly looked around to evaluate the situation. He had only been absent from the battlefield for a dozen heartbeats, but in a clash like this one, just a few seconds was an eternity. Just as he had suspected, things were not looking great. His absence left the rear of the human formation wide open, and a tide of Stone Hive soldiers was already flowing up the slope, approaching it. Most were already well outside the range of effect of the dying wish. That was really, really bad. Sunny's eyes widened. I have to come up with something, fast. Since there was no time to think, only a single idea came to mind. It sould lead to a lot of unforeseen circumstances, but forced to act immediately, he did not see any other choice. Commanding the extraordinary rock to relay his command, Sunny barked, "Samara Kimi, turn around and open fire." At the same time, he dismissed his armor. As both of his soldiers unleashed a hail of bullets at the flood of abominations advancing from the back, the undying chain disappeared into a swarm of sparks. At the same time, wisps of dark fog swirled around his body. For a few seconds, Sunny was left without any protection. Ignoring that chilling fact, he dove into the mass of nightmare creatures, rampaging between them as the dark fog slowly coalesced into a different suit of armor. Luckily, or rather due to his panicked effort, no attack managed to land on his body in that time. Glossy onyx, ominous lines, intricate and ancient design. Finally, the mantle of the underworld wove itself into existence. His shadows slid onto its black surface. Merged with it, the dying wish was suddenly augmented by the underworld armament enchantment. The nightmare creatures advancing on the rear of the human formation slowed down and stalled. Then, they froze in place. And then, one after another, they slowly turned around and peered at Sunny. Subjected to an almost palpable pressure of immense hatred and bloodlust, he smiled nervously. "Ah, come eat me, bastards. Look, I am very tasty." With fervor and frenzy that made him shudder, the mass of nightmare creatures obliged. Chapter 862, Soul Reaper. The Death Wish enchantment worked. In fact, it worked a little bit too well. Damn. Sunny was drowning in the tide of nightmare creatures, no matter how strong he was, No matter how fast he was, no matter how well he understood the attack patterns of the Stone Hive soldiers, there were just too many of them for him to handle without paying the price. The mantle of the underworld sustained more and more hits. The onyx armor mostly held for now, and what little damage it did sustain was swiftly mended by the living stone enchantment. His body beneath it, however, was hurting. There were no holes in him yet, but it was just a matter of time. If there was one good thing about the situation, however, it was that the irregulars were completely safe from being attacked from the back. Sonny was holding the mass of abominations advancing from the rear single-handedly, killing more and more of them as he desperately tried to survive. By now, all the snow around him had melted, and the rocks were covered by the viscous blue lymph. Savaged carcasses of nightmare creatures littered the ground, and 3 shadow tentacles were rampaging among those that remained. The 4th had been destroyed by another fallen abomination, whom Sonny then finished off with the shining blade of the cruel sight. The twilight enveloping the summit of the mountain was long gone. High above, a constant stream of lightning tore the darkness of the cold sky, and on the mountain slope itself, chaotic flashes of light produced by winter and other awakened ensnared in a bloody battle with the Stone Hive created a strange and beautiful illumination. Sonny himself was surrounded by nothing except for darkness, however, since the shadow lantern devoured any light that reached him. I can't go on like this for much longer. His only solace was that he did not need to. Soon help would arrive. Sonny just had to hold on long enough for Master Jet to finish off the corrupted lieutenants of the Hive and join the battle against the lesser abominations. Slaying a score of corrupted was not something an Ascended was supposed to be able to do, but he had faith in Soul Reaper's ability. After all, even saints were wary of fighting her. Speaking of Colonel Jet, killing a frenzied fallen beast with a devastating slash of the cruel sight, and at the same time piercing the head of an awakened monster with the ghostly blade of the Moonlight Shard. Sonny used the carcasses of the dead creatures to buy himself a moment of respite and glanced higher up the slope, where Soul Reaper was in a similar position as him, drowning in abominations as she was trying to hunt down the strongest among them before they could hunt her. Master Jet was moving with murderous purpose and terrifying speed, dodging the storm of attacks as she descended upon one corrupted after another. The blade of her glaive ignoring all physical armor as it viciously struck directly at their darkness-infested soul cores. All of it was very bizarre, and also gave him a better understanding of why Soul Reaper was so feared by other awakened. Very few humans possessed powerful means of defending themselves from soul attacks. However, she was not even delivering blows infused with soul damage. Instead, her glaive was somehow able to deliver physical damage directly to the souls of her enemies. More than that, it could bypass all forms of armor and strike at the vulnerable cores. Scary. But there was more strangeness about how Master Jet fought. She was just too fast, too strong, too deadly. Even knowing that her cohort was assembled based on their ability to augment the combat performance of their commanding officer, Sonny could not explain how Soul Reaper was so frighteningly powerful. Just her physical prowess alone was almost on par with his own, which was not supposed to be possible. Not only did Sonny possess more cores, he also enjoyed the enhancement of shadows, and yet he couldn't deny what he saw. Her battle style, meanwhile, was brutal and domineering, honed and perfectly sharpened to achieve a single purpose: deliver swift death and utter devastation to her enemies. While it lacked flair and refinement, when Sonny looked at how Soul Reaper fought, he felt something that he had never felt before. It was the lethal weight of thousands and thousands of deathly battles. He did not think he had ever encountered a human fighter that seemed to possess quite as much combat experience. Her technique possessed a dark depth to it that he had yet to sense from anyone else. Not even Pierce and Wealthy, 2 high-ranking knights of valor, could compare to Soul Reaper Jet. Not even the saints he had met. It made sense. In hindsight, saints serving legacy clans might have been more powerful, but they led a very different life than someone like Master Jet. The government was always short on personnel and resources, and so every capable fighter serving them had to do more. Considering that Soul Reaper was possibly the most capable of them, she had to also be one of the most active government operatives. What it meant was that while masters and saints of the legacy clans only undertook the most important combat missions and enjoyed sufficient rest between each battle, she had been sent to deal with emerging gates, rampaging nightmare creatures, awakened criminals, and other dangerous issues almost every single day. No wonder Master Jet always seemed a bit sleep-deprived. Battle after battle, day after day. Considering that she had entered government service more than a decade ago, that would indeed make Soul Reaper the most seasoned human fighter Sunny had ever met, at least in terms of pure number of combat encounters and confirmed kills. Strangely, not even the other irregular captains seemed as accomplished in battle and slaughter, despite being older than Jet. Suddenly, he was overcome by burning curiosity. I wonder if I can shadow her combat technique. At the level of masters, a battle style was more than just a set of moves combined with a special mental framework. Due to how intricate their control of essence was, a style also included unique patterns of essence reinforcement. Knowing that he only had a split second left before his own battle would continue, Sunny strained his eyes and peered beneath the surface of Master Jet's mortal shell. After reaching the third step of Shadow Dance, his ability to observe and understand the flow of essence had vastly improved, and so, however, what he saw left him shaken and disturbed. Chapter 863 Fractured. Sunny had seen souls that were radiant and full of light, and he had seen souls that were being consumed by a spreading corruption. However, he had never seen a soul like Jet's. It was lightless and shrouded in darkness, almost like his own. A single powerful core burned in its depths, superposed against her heart. The core itself was strange, bizarre, and filled him with an eerie sense of profound unease. The ethereal orb was irregularly shaped, and much larger than it was supposed to be, grossly overshadowing the size of other ascended cores he had witnessed. Its surface was covered by a net of deep, twisting cracks. No, not quite. It was more like the whole core was assembled from numerous shards, as if it had been shattered once, and then crudely assembled back into an uneven sphere. Some shards seemed to match each other, while others did not fit well, bringing a sense of chaos to an already flawed and fractured, disfigured construct of Soul Reaper's core. However, there was also a certain order and beauty to the ugly disharmony of it. The patchwork sphere of broken shards shone with furious, radiant light. It was brimming with a stunning amount of soul essence, which was much more than an Ascended should have possessed. However, unlike most cores, this one's radiance was not uniform. Instead, most of the light was concentrated in its depths, while the outer edges were dark and dull. More than that, thin streams of light were constantly flowing through the cracks of the shattered core and dissipating into nothingness. They were like water slowly seeping out of a cracked vessel. Despite that, Master Jet's essence did not seem to be diminishing. Instead, as Sunny watched, the strange soul core only grew brighter. What the? At that moment, Soul Reaper had just slaughtered another corrupted abomination. This one had taken her longer to put down, since as a monster, it possessed two cores. Each had to be destroyed with separate strikes. As soon as both perished, however, the creature twitched and collapsed to the ground. Then something strange happened. When the corrupted insect died, a flood of tainted essence seemed to rush into Master Jet's fractured core. The remnants of the fetid darkness permeating it were then burned away by the furious light, and soon a stream of pure radiance flowed into the brilliant center of the shining sphere. Sunny was left very puzzled by what he had just seen, and a little bit troubled as well. I guess there really are all kinds of bizarre aspects. He was one to talk. His own soul was not exactly the picture of normalcy. In any case, distracted by the unusual nature of Master Jet's soul core, Sunny had missed his chance to study her battle technique. All he managed to notice was that her flesh was saturated by essence to a much larger degree than usual. It was as if, unlike all the other awakened, Soul Reaper's ability to reinforce herself with essence was not limited by the modest capacity of human flesh, or at least had a limit so high that it put the rest of them to shame. That would partially explain why she was so strong and fast, despite possessing only a single core. This just went to show that having multiple cores was not an absolute advantage. There were a lot of strange and unimaginable powers out there, many of which could achieve the same result through different means. However, they wouldn't be as versatile. Would I be able to win against her in a fight? Sunny was not sure. He was reasonably confident in his ability. But then again, as someone who often achieved victory through being underestimated, he did not want to fall into the same trap. Even if he won, what would be the cost? Losing one or two cores was not going to kill him, most likely, but being left with a crippled soul was small consolation for victory. Maybe that was why saints were reluctant to fight Soul Reaper despite being much more powerful than her, and why many people treated her with fear and resentment. Sunny would have loved to ponder on these issues, but sadly his time was up. The Stone Hive soldiers were already jumping over the carcasses he had used to hide behind, and their frenzy was just as murderous as before. Gripping the cruel sight, he lunged forward and pushed it into the tough carapace of another enemy. Hundreds of nightmare creatures descended upon the three cohorts of the irregulars. With Soul Reaper diving into their tide alone to hunt down the most dangerous foes, the initial clash was not as obliterating as it could have been. Supported by Queen and her sharpshooters, the melee fighters held, but were instantly surrounded. Behind them, Master Sunless, the youngest of the first company captains, was somehow holding off the entire flanking force of abominations by himself. Even if irregulars had time to look back, they wouldn't see much except for a veil of strange darkness that refused to dissipate despite the constant flashes of bright light produced by the battle. All they could perceive were the deafening shrieks of dying nightmare creatures and the cracking noises of parting chitin that resounded from the depths of unnatural darkness, as well as smell the sickening stench of burning flesh. One of the soldiers staggered back after killing another bug and briefly looked back. At that exact moment, a disfigured body of a massive fallen beast flew out of the darkness and crashed onto the rocks, splattering fetid blue lymph all over the mountain slope. It was more or less torn into two halves, not cut torn. The soldier shuddered. Gods, what kind of monster is that kid? Suddenly, a blinding flash momentarily turned the world white. High above them, two gargantuan forms clashed furiously, producing a deafening thunderclap. The whole mountain shook from the violent force of their impact. Cursing his luck, the irregular tried to throw all unnecessary thoughts out of his mind and lunged back into the deadly melee. There were still hundreds of the damned bugs for them to kill. By his side, other soldiers of the first irregular company fought for their lives. No one faltered. No one allowed despair to poison their mind. Each of them gave it their all, full of determination and resolve worthy of the government's best. And yet, things weren't going too well. The enemy was just too numerous, vicious, and overwhelming. Worse than that, the cursed bugs were wickedly smart and coordinated. Something had to change soon. Chapter 864, Breaking the Balance. Stuck in the middle of a never-ending massacre, barely holding on, and sensing a ruinous hint of exhaustion already seeping into his muscles, Sunny knew that the battle was entering its decisive stage. For now, it seemed to remain in a fragile equilibrium. The Jade Beetle and Saint Tyrus were clashing somewhere high above, neither of them capable of striking down the adversary yet. On the ground, Master Jet was fighting alone in the tide of nightmare creatures, seeking out the most powerful foes. She had already killed many, but her task was far from being accomplished. The irregulars held, pushing back against the rabid onslaught of the Stone Hive. They had managed to avoid being overwhelmed, but could not throw the enemy back and go on the offensive. Even with Winter and her sharpshooters taking out the most deadly fallen abominations, the situation was extremely precarious. And finally, Sunny was protecting the rear of the formation. He was containing his share of nightmare creatures as well, but was not anywhere near prevailing against them. For every hive soldier he killed, two immediately took its place. Neither side could wipe out the other. This balance, however, could be destroyed at any moment. Time was working against the irregulars for the most part, since their soul essence and endurance were not infinite. The soldiers were not going to be able to keep up with the ruthless tempo of the furious battle for much longer. Their only hope was that Soul Reaper would finish off the last of the corrupted abominations and join the fight against the mass of lesser soldiers soon. However, from a few glimpses that Sunny had caught, things weren't going too well for the commander of the first irregular company. Master Jet had quickly dealt with the comparatively weak corrupted, but now only the most powerful of them remained. More than that, the Stone Hive seemed to have understood how much of a threat this single human represented. With each second, it was getting harder and harder for Soul Reaper to move and attack her targets. She would probably be able to kill them all eventually, But was that going to be fast enough? Currently, Sunny was not sure. I need to do something. He had extinguished the divine flames burning within the blade of the cruel sight to conserve essence, and was now fighting against the frenzied abominations with nothing but its somber silver steel. Mounds of corpses surrounded him, and more creatures were jumping over their fallen brethren every second to lunge at the hateful human. But what can I do? How was he supposed to break the balance of the battle in favor of the human force? He had already done his best to gain the upper hand in his own section of the battlefield, and failed. Preventing the soldiers of the Stone Hive from advancing at the rest of the irregulars was all that he could achieve here. Changing the scales of the main front line was also outside his ability. If Sunny chose to join the awakened fighters, they would gain a boost of inspiration from the dying wish. However, they would also be forced to split their focus and defend against attacks from two directions. Whatever benefit he could bring would be invalidated by the increased pressure. Assisting Master Jet was out of the question. Although Sunny was more than capable of slaying a corrupted abomination or several, it would take him some time. Not to mention that to achieve real results, he was going to have to abandon his position behind the formation of the irregulars. So then only one component of the battle remained. Dodging an especially fierce attack of a bloodthirsty bug, he used one of the shadow tentacles to suddenly pull himself away from the advancing enemies and pierce the body of a somewhat startled abomination a dozen meters further down the slope instead. Then, he briefly looked up. Two giant shapes were entangled with each other, high in the dark skies. Arcs of lightning danced between them, and rivers of caustic black ash were flowing through the air like clouds. His face turned grim. It's too strong. I can't kill it. Can't kill it fast enough. But then again, did he need to? Deciding something, Sunny sighed and threw the cruel sight into the maw of a lunging abomination. Then, he closed his eyes and tried to forget about the fact that he was surrounded by a swarm of nightmare creatures, each of them driven crazy by the desire to tear him apart. The shadows unleashed from the small lantern that was tied to his belt suddenly surged forward and formed a barrier around him. Even the tentacles that had been slaughtering Hive soldiers dissipated and merged into its dark walls. Within the barrier, Sunny summoned Morgan's warbow as a swarm of scarlet sparks appeared in the air. A heavy blow shook the shadow cage he had constructed around himself. Then another and another and another. Soon, countless strikes were raining on it, making the surface of the barrier shake and crack. Sunny had made the cage as durable as he could. Infused with his ascended essence, it was much more resilient than the armored hull of the mighty battleship he had once helped preserve. And yet, just a few breaths later, it was already crumbling. Wide cracks appeared on its surface, and then a sharp chitin blade shot through one of them, scraping against the onyx surface of the mantle of the underworld and throwing Sunny back. However, it was enough. As the black bow appeared in his hand, Sunny commanded the shadow cage to transform itself. Immediately, it lost solidity and substance instead. Long and sharp spikes shot forward from the barrier in all directions. A few abominations were skewered by them, but most were only stalled for a moment as deep scratches appeared on their carapaces. Not paying them any attention, Sunny looked up and drew his bow. Soul Arrow, Death Dealer. This time, a lustrous arrow that appeared to be made out of pale gold appeared on the string. Its wide broadhead, which was perfect for slicing flesh and dealing devastating wounds, was radiating a soft golden radiance. As time seemed to slow down, Sunny took aim, wrapped his shadows around the arrow, and then sent it soaring into the sky. Flying through the darkness, the arrow reached its target almost instantly. The target, of course, was the corrupted tyrant. However, Sunny was not aiming to kill it. He knew all too well that a creature like that would not be destroyed by a single strike, no matter how much essence he poured into it. The golden arrow did not strike the milky white chitin or pierce the creature's eye. Instead, it hit one of its translucent wings, tore through it, and then bit deep into the base of another one. At the same time, Sunny activated a third enchantment. Burden of Peace enchantment description. After soul arrows pierce the flesh of an enemy, their weight can be drastically increased. Lodged deep into the jade beetle's flesh, the golden arrow suddenly grew as heavy as a ship's anchor. Far below the monstrous tyrant, Sunny smiled in satisfaction. Try and fly away now, bastard. Chapter 865. Lucky Shot. Sunny was not powerful enough to casually slay a corrupted tyrant, yet defeating one was not outside the realm of possibility for him anymore, but it would require a good amount of meticulous study and preparation. Even then, challenging a nightmare creature of such immense power meant dire risk to his life. However, Sunny did not really need to kill the Jade Beetle. All he really needed to do was to break the balance of power between the monstrous tyrant and Sky Tide. Something like that was more easily said than done, but Sunny had several advantages that very few people possessed. He had a bow created by the best forgemasters of the great clan Valor, or maybe even King Anvil himself. That bow demanded immense strength to be drawn, but was capable of sending arrows much further, and imbued them with much greater force. He had the Death Dealer enchantment, a rare divine affinity that translated into highly destructive soul arrows, and the ability to see through the darkness devouring the cold sky of Antarctica. More importantly, he had enough power and ability to buy himself enough time to make a good shot. As a result, the divine arrow he had sent tore through one of the tyrant's wings and dealt modest damage to another. Just like that, 2 of the 4 wings of the Jade Beetle were wounded. That alone might have not robbed it of the ability to fly, but combined with the weight of the burden of peace, the result severely reduced the creature's mobility in the air. Sadly, it did not plummet to the earth as Sunny had hoped. But it was enough to give St. Tyrus a crucial advantage. Using the window of opportunity created for her by Sunny's arrow, she lunged into a recklessly committed attack without wasting a single moment. Slashing at the 2 untouched wings of the Jade Beetle with her steel talons, Sky Tide finally managed to break them. Then, she delivered a terrible blow with her beak and threw the abomination down, wounded and barely able to keep its weight in the air. The corrupted tyrant was ruthlessly sent into a perilous fall. The Jade Beetle tried to slow down the speed of it, but failed. A few moments later, the massive body hit the slope of the mountain with a thunderous crash. However, Sunny was too busy to see any of this, because while his arrow had managed to turn the tables of the titanic clash in the skies, he had to survive the consequences of that success somehow. Sunny had to burn through a lot of essence to have a hope of dealing serious damage to the corrupted tyrant, and so his reserves were now very close to being empty. He had discarded the cruel sight to summon Morgan's warbow and buy himself enough time to create the shadow cage, and so he was now more or less unarmed in front of the swarm of nightmare creatures. He had wrapped the soul arrow in 3 of his 4 shadows, and so they needed time to return. Even worse, making the fateful shot left him open to enemy attacks for far too long. Even before Sky Tide delivered her vicious strike, Sunny was already dearly regretting his actions. Dismissing both the warbow and the distant cruel sight, he then summoned the latter back. However, the somber spear would only appear after several precious seconds, leaving him not much choice but to face the avalanche of chitin and sharp mandibles with his bare hands, or the short and thin blade of the moonlight shard at best. Instead of using the ghostly stiletto, though, Sunny simply commanded one of the wild shadows surrounding him to flow into his hands and turn into a dark odachi. Manipulating the shape of shadows was not a straightforward task. Forming a simple tentacle was the easiest, since it was not too far removed from the natural state of the shadows. However, the more precise, specific, and compressed the shape was, the more concentration and essence it took to achieve it. A sword hard enough to withstand the rigors of battle and sharp enough to cut through the flesh of the enemies was not easy to create. Usually, it would have taken Sunny some time and a lot of mental exertion to make one from a formless shadow. However, the black odachi appeared in his hands almost instantly. That was because Sunny had methodically trained several applications of shadow manifestation during the 6 calm months after the second nightmare. He had come up with a small number of forms that could serve his basic needs in battle, such as a barrier, a spike, a chain, a sword, and created them over and over again, day after day, until manifesting them became an instinct. That was why it only took a split second for the shadow sword to manifest when he needed it. Of course, as a blade created from ascended essence, it was comparable to an ascended weapon in terms of sharpness and lethality. Sunny was just not sure how long he would be able to maintain the dark odachi, considering that keeping it tangible was slowly eating through the scarce remains of his essence. Crap! He barely managed to meet the first foe with a strike, neatly cutting its body in two halves. Although Sunny had long grown accustomed to using a spear, holding a sword still felt the most familiar to him. Fighting with an Odachi again felt like meeting an old friend. He would have smiled if there was not a crushing wave of abominations falling down on him. Sharp blades of chitin struck at the mantle of the underworld, throwing Sunny off balance. Using the residual momentum of his previous strike, he slashed with the Odachi and severed the legs of a fallen beast attacking him, then thrust his sword forward, piercing the head of another. Something crashed into him from the side, causing Sunny to stagger. Bad. Sunny paled as he realized that a moment later, he would fall and become buried under a mass of abominations. Luckily, at that moment, something massive and dreadfully heavy crashed into the mountain with terrible speed. The impact caused the whole slope to tremble, as if from a powerful earthquake. As a result, not only Sunny, but also every other irregular, as well as every soldier of the stone hive, were suddenly thrown to the ground. Chapter 866, White Stone. A huge cloud of snow and stone debris rose into the air. Hitting the ground with a muffled yelp, Sunny rolled and tried to maintain the shape of his Odachi. Luckily, his training had not been in vain, even after being startled by the earth-splitting fall of the tyrant and jolted by the sudden collision with the slope of the mountain. He did not allow the shadow sword to unravel. Arg damn. Slightly disoriented, Sunny sat up and looked around, expecting to see monstrous insects rushing to finish him off. To his relief, the soldiers of the stone hive were in a similar position as him, despite possessing 6 legs and a center of gravity that was much lower to the ground relative to their height. They were all sprawled on the cold rocks, trying to get up. Actually, there were surprisingly few of them around him. Those that were alive, at least crushed corpses, littered this particular stretch of the slope, flattened so thoroughly that it was hard to recognize the shape of the chitin-clad abominations. Sunny strained to regain his wits and frowned. Did I do that? The damage seemed too exaggerated to be done by Sunny or his shadow tentacles. He couldn't see very far either, because a wall of white stone was blocking his view. Where did this crag come from? If he remembered correctly, there were no large boulders or tall outcroppings near where he had fought. Had he rolled that far down the slope? As Sunny was trying to understand why a wall of rock suddenly appeared in front of him, a stream of inky black liquid flowed down its smooth white surface. Then, the wall of stone slightly moved. His eyes widened. Oh crap. Craning his neck, Sunny managed to get a better look at the thing that he had assumed to be a stone cliff. Of course it was not. Instead, it was the carapace of the corrupted tyrant that had been thrown into the mountain by Sky Tide's vicious attack. The creature seemed battered, with its milky white chitin cracked in several places and leaking viscous black blood, but very much alive. In fact, at the same time as Sunny looked up at it, the jade beetle's expressionless black eyes shifted and peered directly at him. Its terrifying mandibles moved slightly. Oh crap. Sunny jumped back at the same time as one of Tyrant's legs came down, shattering the mountain slope and sending another tremor running through it. He was only saved by his quick reaction and a bit of luck. The shadow Odachi whistled through the air and struck the white chitin, only to bounce off of it without dealing any damage. The jade beetle stared at him with its unfathomable black eyes and moved, slowly rising. It opened its maw where a cloud of black ash was already swirling, ready to be spat out. Sunny knew that if that ash enveloped him, something very bad was going to happen. For a split second, he was paralyzed by fear. Then, the familiar weight of the cruel sight calmed Sunny down. The somber spear finally finished manifesting itself into reality, and he instinctively caught it by letting go of the hilt of the shadow Odachi with one hand. What difference does it make? Sunny stared at the domineering tyrant in horror, and then did the only thing he could think of, infusing some of his last drops of essence into the cruel sight to imbue it with an elemental property. He threw the spear again, only a moment after being reunited with it. He did have enough presence of mind to put some thought into what type of elemental damage to choose, though neither divine flame nor soul damage would do much in this situation, so, that might work, I think. The somber spear disappeared into the cloud of darkness wreathing in the creature's maw without a trace. A moment later, the tyrant suddenly shuddered and let out a shrill, deafening shriek. Its movement slowed down for a second or two. That was more than enough time to give Sunny a chance to run away. Turning around, he dashed up the slope with as much speed as he could muster. The cloud of ash shot to chase him, but quickly dissipated due to the fact that the jade beetle was distracted by torturous pain. The element Sunny had chosen was not the most destructive, but it was insidious, persistent, and extremely painful. That element was corrosion. To be more precise, it was a special kind of wicked corrosion that the Dark Mirror had memorized after Sunny inhaled a lungful of Wormvine's poisonous miasma back on the shipwreck island. Blood. Weave had overcome it without any trouble, so he did not expect to deal much damage to the tyrant. However, it had hurt like hell to deal with it, so Sunny hoped that the damned monstrosity would be distracted for a few seconds, giving him a chance to retreat. That's right, retreat with dignity, not run away in panic. As he swiftly retreated, Sunny felt a cold shiver running down his spine. The jade beetle had to be preparing another attack. At that moment, a shadow fell from the sky. Saint Tyrus, in her human form and wielding a saber that seemed sharp enough to cut the fabric of the world itself, flashed through the air and collided with the corrupted tyrant somewhere behind his back. Sunny, meanwhile, finally saw the battlefield through the cloud of snow that had been thrown up by the jade beetle's fall. The irregulars were slowly rising to their feet, and so were the soldiers of the stone hive. Only one figure appeared to have withstood the earthquake and used the shock of it to her advantage. Some distance away, Master Jet landed on the swaying body of the last corrupted abomination and thrust her glaive deep into its flesh. A vicious smile appeared on her face as the creature shuddered and fell down. The battle formation of awakened warriors was broken, but Soul Reaper was finally finished with her dreadful task. Despite how much she must have exerted herself to slay a score of corrupted beasts and monsters as well as a couple demons, she seemed to be still brimming with essence. Master Jet would be able to join the main line of the first irregular company soon. The flanking force that Sunny had been holding back, meanwhile, seemed to be all but destroyed by his own efforts and the devastating fall of the tyrant. What little remained of it was currently being torn to pieces by the furious confrontation of the Jade Beetle and Sky Tide. All in all, the situation was not too terrible. The scales definitely tilted in the favor of humans now. They just had to capitalize on that advantage. Running terribly low on essence, battered and exhausted, Sunny let out a silent groan. Damn it. Damnation. This is just day 2. Chapter 867, Tooth and Nail. The tide of the battle had turned. The terrifying confrontation between the tyrant of the Stone Hive and Sky Tide of the White Feather Clan went on, but now, the eerily beautiful Jade Beetle was clearly losing. On the battlefield itself, the force of abominations trying to attack the irregulars from the rear had been decimated under the cover of unnatural darkness. The corrupted lieutenants leading the main assault had been dealt with by Soul Reaper. Although the human soldiers had been feeling hints of despair just a few minutes ago now, a new strength filled their bodies. Fight. We can do this. Crush the bugs. The irregulars knew that the moments when hope finally shined from the distance were often the most dangerous, so they did not allow themselves to relax and fought with fierce determination. Then, something strange happened. The veil of darkness enveloping the lower part of the slope suddenly flowed forward and drowned a large swath of nightmare creatures, assaulting their defensive line from the flank. Immediately, frenzied shrieks of the abominations resounded from it, only to stop abruptly in the cracking noise of splitting chitin. At the same time, Soul Reaper Jet broke through the ranks of the hive and joined the crescent battle formation. Suddenly reassured, the humans fought with doubled ferocity. The effect was even more pronounced for the members of one of the cohorts, who could actually see through the unnatural darkness, thanks to Kim's unique aspect. Luster, who had lost count of the number of repulsive bugs he had killed or wounded with his halberd, threw a quick glance to the flank of the defensive line and almost stumbled. What? Out there in the darkness, their captain was dancing between the abominations, slaying one after another with graceful strikes of a long and somber blade. His swordsmanship was elegant and exquisite. However, what stunned the young man was not the battle skill of their commanding officer, but the armor Captain Sunless was wearing, as well as the shape and color of his odachi. That's, that's Mongrel's armor and sword. Luster's eyes widened. Don't tell me. Suddenly, a lot of things made sense. Influenced by the death wish enchantment that spread to those who witnessed Sunny fight, an intense fire ignited in Luster's heart. His eyes gleamed, and he threw himself into the battle with burning determination. More, I need to kill more. After learning their captain's true identity, Luster was extremely inspired. He had given up on his goal not long after the clash with the stone hive started, but now it did not seem as impossible anymore. I must vanquish these abominable bugs. If I kill enough, I might get a hug from Master Winter. Oh, I can't wait. Similarly, although of course in a different manner, the other members of the cohort experienced the bolstering effect of the dying wish as well. All of them fought like devils, earning themselves a fearsome reputation among the irregulars. And the man who had made it all possible was currently cursing his fate. Damn and crap. Curse it all. Surrounded by a swarm of nightmare creatures, Sunny fought while feeling extremely aggrieved. Things were not going great for him. He was extremely tired, bruised and battered, and worst of all, his essence was running dry. Keeping the shadow sword tangible was eating through what little he had left with frightening speed. But the worst offender was the shadow lantern. A divine memory was as gluttonous as one would think. On top of that, there were the dying wish and the mantle of the underworld. Pretty soon he would be completely spent. Sadly, he could not dismiss the veil of shadows, since doing that would reveal his identity as Mongrel to a lot of strangers. The members of his own cohort had already seen enough, most likely, but he somewhat trusted them to keep his secret. Due to the fact that Sunny had kept them alive through several dire battles, the bonds of loyalty were already forming between the 6 soldiers and their captain. He had to dismiss something, though. The first thing to go was the dying wish. Although it brought benefit to his soldiers and, to a lesser degree, to all irregulars, he simply could not allow the expenditure of essence that both the death wish and the underworld armament required. The next memory to go was the mantle of the underworld itself. Sunny was reluctant and more than a little scared to continue his fight without a suit of armor, but there was little he could do. Without sufficient essence to feed the living stone, many cracks appeared on the stone-like onyx surface of the mantle. Not only had it lost some of its protective quality, but there was a risk that the ancient armor would receive too much damage and succumb entirely. It was also growing heavy without the effects of the Feather of Truth enchantment. He just had to fight carefully and concentrate on dodging the enemy attacks from now on. Even if he made a mistake or two, a couple wounds were not going to kill him. Thankfully, there were not as many enemies left around him as at the start of the battle. Once the most damning evidence was gone, Sunny had no reason to keep the shadow lantern active, so he dismissed it as well. With no enchantments to keep powered and the small amount of essence he received back by dismissing these memories, he could maintain the shape of his sword for a bit longer. Sunny killed a few more enemies, barely avoided a stream of acid that one of the monstrous insects spat, and retaliated by neatly severing its body in half. When is this going to end, damn it? A few seconds later, his odachi turned hazy and then dissipated into a shadow. Sunny was at his limit. Please, gods, let it stop. Let it stop. Let it stop, Arg. Damnation, this is such crap. What the hell? What kind of damned situation is this? With nothing better to do, he grabbed a severed chitin blade of one of the abominations and used it as a makeshift sword. At that moment, the veil of shadows created by the shadow lantern finally dissipated. The irregulars saw a stunning image. Wearing no armor and only clad in a torn black bodysuit, Captain Sunless hammered a severed limb of an enemy into the carapace of a fallen abomination. The white chitin split, and the creature let out a painful shriek. With indescribable fury and resentment burning in his eyes, the young master bared his teeth and punched the beast with his naked fist, crushing its head. The veteran soldiers shuddered. Such righteous wrath. Master Sunless must really hate nightmare creatures, huh? Sunny, meanwhile, kicked the fallen beast away and let out a trembling breath. Phew, that was close. How did I even survive that last attack? At that moment, something imperceptible changed on the battlefield. The stone hive, which had been unified and deviously intelligent before, suddenly seemed to lose much of its coordination. At the same time, the spell suddenly whispered into Sunny's ear, "You have slain a corrupted tyrant, remnant of the Jade Queen. Your shadow grows stronger. You have received a memory." He blinked. What? What had just happened? It seemed that the persistent corrosion, which the cruel sight had learned to reflect thanks to the worm-vine's miasma, turned out to be more powerful than Sunny had thought. Much more likely than that, though, was that it just happened to finish off the mighty abomination after it had been brought to the very edge of death by Skytide, but before she could deal the killing blow. What were the chances of that? 1 in a million. Standing above the dead fallen beast, Sunny grinned. I guess I'm lucky today. Chapter 868, Reputation. After the death of the tyrant, the battle did not last long. The stone hive had already lost many soldiers, as well as its most powerful champions. Without the guiding sentience of its ruler, the lesser creatures seemed to lack most of their intelligence and coordination. Feeling this weakness, the exhausted irregulars advanced and slaughtered them without a hint of hesitation. With Soul Reaper rampaging at the front of the formation, the number of the monstrous insects quickly dwindled. Then, Saint Tyrus joined the battle and more or less wiped out the remaining abominations single-handedly. Skytide seemed to have received several wounds in her fight with the remnant of the Jade Queen, but it did not slow her much. Moving between the giant insects like wind, almost too swift to be seen with a naked eye, she disposed of all the remaining nightmare creatures in mere seconds. Her saber cut through their impregnable white carapaces as if they were made out of water. Just like that, suddenly, silence settled over the summit of the mountain. The soldiers looked at each other in confusion, struggling to believe that that bloody battle ended so abruptly. Then, when the sweet understanding dawned on them, the irregulars lowered themselves to the ground with relieved sighs, drained of all strength. Everyone was too exhausted to move and needed a few minutes to rest and collect their thoughts. Tired smiles appeared on their faces. Sunny found a patch of rock that was not covered by fetid blue lymph and plopped on it as well. He was utterly spent. As the excitement of the battle died down, his thoughts turned slow and lazy. Ah, I'm hurt all over. He felt a pleasant satisfaction. Not only had they won a hard fight, but he also received a fair share of shadow fragments. Better yet, there was a transcendent memory of the 5th tier he was yet to take a look at. For a moment, he wanted to summon the runes immediately, but then gave up on that idea. He was too tired to think properly right now. The memory could wait until the cohort was safely back aboard the Rhino. For now, Sunny was content to just sit on the ground and rest. As he did, his shadows naturally took a look around. The summit of the mountain had been transformed. The snow had melted or turned into blue sludge. The slope itself was littered with hundreds of dead nightmare creatures and deep cracks. The gate still pulsed with darkness at the very peak, but one side of the deep schism it filled had collapsed and crumbled down. Further down the slope, the massive carcass of the jade beetle lay on the cold stones. It seemed that the final stage of its battle with Saint Tyrus had taken them away from the battlefield. As a result, it was now pretty far from the stretch of the slope where Sunny had fought with the flanking force of the hive. Only corpses of awakened and fallen creatures remained. Some were cut apart, some were torn apart by the shadow tentacles, and many were utterly crushed by the fall of their ruler. Of course, the irregulars did not know that, since that area had been covered by the veil of darkness summoned by the shadow lantern. To them, it all looked like Sunny's doing. Their whispers entered his ears. Gods, look over there. Is that where Master Sunless fought? So many dead bugs. Wait, what the hell? Why are these corpses so mangled? It's like they were put through a meat grinder. I mean, it does not even look like they were cut by a blade. It's more like he ripped them apart and crushed them with his bare hands. He did. Did you not see him at the end? His weapon and armor must have been destroyed in the fight, so he just tore a leg off a fallen abomination and then beat the bastard to death with it. And then I swear to the gods, I saw it myself. He stood there and smiled as though someone gave him the best present in the world. I think he really hates nightmare creatures. His expression before that, so much anger, so much resentment. It looked, I don't know, personal? Maybe there's a tragic story there. No wonder Soul Reaper went to the trouble of personally recruiting him. What kind of devil is that kid? Sunny blinked. Had he really smiled? Oh, that must have been the moment when he received the transcendent memory. He had indeed lost composure, and grinned like an idiot for a few moments there. In any case, none of these soldiers seemed to have connected him to Mongrel. They just thought that he was some kind of monster with a personal grudge against nightmare creatures. His own cohort, meanwhile. Sunny turned slightly and caught sight of Luster, who was staring at him with an intense expression. The young man's eyes seemed extremely bitter for some reason. "What's up with that clown?" At that moment, someone approached and sat down near him. Sunny turned around and saw Winter, who stared at him with a nonchalant expression. "What?" Before he could finish the thought, she suddenly grinned and pulled him into a very tight hug. "You did great, little devil. Let's be friends." Soon, the irregulars caught their breaths and started moving. Saint Tyrus departed after approaching Sunny to thank him for his contribution in slaying the tyrant, her voice cordial and stern as usual. This time, however, it almost sounded partial. Since the threat of the stone hive had been eliminated, a signal was sent to the First Army that the path was clear. Not too long after that, a long column of vehicles appeared on the road that stretched far below, on the other side of the mountain. One of the divisions was proceeding with haste to its next destination. The irregulars themselves were busy with collecting soul shards from the slain abominations. A dozen heavy loaders arrived to drag the carcass of the remnant of the Jade Queen away. Even in death, a corrupted tyrant was extremely valuable. Its impenetrable carapace and other parts had a lot of uses for advanced spell-tech applications. Sunny would not be surprised if some of the Jade Beetle ended up being used to bolster the defenses of one of the siege capitals, most likely Falcon Scott itself. After some time, Master Jet left for the base camp where the APCs were parked in order to contact the Army Command. Since there was nothing for Sunny to do at the summit of the mountain, he followed her and climbed into the Rhino to rest. There, sitting on his comfortable bed, Sunny finally summoned the runes. A transcendent memory. Let's see. Soon his eyes gleamed. Chapter 869, Sin of Solace. The runes shimmered in the air. Memory. Sin of Solace. Memory rank, Transcendent. Memory tier V. Memory type, Weapon. Looking at ethereal weave of symbols, Sunny felt a cold shiver running down his spine. A weapon, the Sin of Solace was the third transcendent memory he had received. However, it was of a higher tier than both the Undying Chain and the Dying Wish combined. More than that, it was a weapon, something that could express its power much more directly than an armor or a charm. Something that he desperately needed here in the cold expanse of Antarctica. A weapon bestowed by the slaying of a corrupted tyrant. Had to be truly powerful. Holding his breath, he continued to study the runes. Memory description. This blade is a whisper of Ariel, the demon of dread, who turned a beautiful monster into a queen and gave her a sinister gift of forbidden knowledge. Sunny tilted his head, suddenly excited. The demon of dread, another daemon. There are 5 of them I know of now. Demon of fate. Demon of hope. Demon of choice. Demon of dread. Wait, who was the 5th one? He strained his memory for a while, and then scratched the back of his head. Oh, right, the demon of oblivion. How did I forget? Sunny pondered about the fact that the demon of oblivion was so forgettable for a bit. Then, he slightly shook his head. In any case, if this memory was connected to a daemon, it had to be immensely powerful. His heart started to beat faster. Memory enchantments. Sinister whisper. Perfect jade. Omen of dread. Hideous truth. Cursed. Sunny blinked. Wait. What? Cursed? What did that mean, cursed? Somewhat disturbed, he decided to read the description of the last enchantment first. Soon, an ugly expression appeared on his face. Cursed enchantment description. This blade slowly drives its wielder mad. What the hell? His new shiny transcendent weapon had come with side effects. What kind of crap is this? Since when do memories have flaws? Mad. It wants to drive me mad. We'll see who goes mad first, damn it. Glancing at the runes with resentment, Sunny decided to study the other enchantments before coming to conclusions. Sinister Whisper Enchantment Description. This blade can deal both physical damage and mental damage to those that it cuts, destroying not only their bodies but also their minds. The mental damage persists like a curse, even after a single cut. He grunted. How insidious! Mental attacks were almost as rare as soul attacks, and equally as hard to defend against. There was something terrifying about them too, especially to those beings that were very hard to kill or nearly immortal. After all, what was the point of living if one's sanity was gone? A blade like that, truly, it would have been a bane of someone like the eternal chain lords of the Kingdom of Hope. If only the damned memory did not deal the same mental damage to the wielder. Sunny grimaced, and then continued to read the runes. Perfect Jade Enchantment Description. This blade is carved from a piece of sublime jade, and as such is sharp and durable beyond logic and reason. Straightforward. Omen of Dread Enchantment Description. A faint remnant of Ariel's presence lingers on this blade, striking terror into the hearts of all beings. Sunny frowned. Another mental attack enchantment, but this one is passive and affects an area. Not bad. Should work wonders when Nightmare is around too. Finally, the last one made him frown. Hideous Truth Enchantment Description. The more the wielder's sanity is shattered, the more powerful this blade becomes. It bestows revelations of madness on those who give in to its will. Sunny sighed. Damnation. So, basically this already formidable weapon could grow many times more terrifying, but only if the person wielding it went completely insane. Conveniently, the Sin of Solace also drove anyone who wielded it to madness, thus providing an easy solution to unlocking the potential of the hideous truth. What am I supposed to do with this thing? And what does that mean? Give in to its will? Does this cursed sword have a will of its own? While Sunny liked to joke that he was a bit crazy, he did not really want to turn into a raving lunatic. He lingered for a few minutes, then took a deep breath and summoned his new memory into existence. Soon, a beautiful Shuangshou Jian appeared in his hands. It was a straight, thin, double-edged greatsword with a narrow guard and a graceful blade that gradually tapered to a sharp tip. Despite the fact that it was almost as long as Sunny was tall, the Sin of Solace surprisingly did not weigh much. In fact, it was as light as a feather. Its hilt was carved out of black obsidian, and the blade itself was stark white, with beautiful patterns etched on it. Despite the description of the perfect jade enchantment, it did not seem rigid as stone. Instead, it was both hard and flexible in perfect proportion. A sword such as this was nimble and swift, but also capable of dealing devastating damage. Despite its breathtaking beauty, however, as soon as Sunny touched the cool obsidian hilt, it was as though someone whispered into his ear. He shivered and turned around, only to find that there was nothing behind him. The whisper, however, did not disappear. It continued to flow from somewhere just out of reach, too quiet to discern any words for now. Sunny felt that if he just concentrated hard enough, he would be able to understand what the rustling voice was saying. And it was important. Very important to understand it. There was a meaning to them that he just had to know. Had to. Before Sunny noticed, his body was covered in cold sweat. He stared at the Sin of Solace with a complicated expression, and then summoned the undying chain. As soon as the bleak armor wrapped itself around his body, the insidious whisper seemed to grow weaker. Sunny was only slightly obsessed with listening to it now. Ah, good. The chains of longing enchantment of the transcendent armor provided him with a high protection against mind attacks, and the cursed attribute of the beautiful Jian seemed to be just that, a strange and sinister mind attack aimed at the sword's own wielder, which meant that Saint, who was completely immune to mind attacks, would be able to use the jade sword without any problem. Sunny was sufficiently certain what he would be able to withstand the tantalizing whispers if need be as well. It was a small price to pay for being able to wield such a frightening transcendent weapon. If push comes to shove, I can afford to lose a bit of sanity too. I mean, what's wrong with going a little mad? Been there, done that. Chapter 870. To-do list. Dismissing the beautiful sword, Sunny breathed a sigh of relief. The insidious whispers assaulting his mind disappeared, leaving only a lingering sense of chill and unease behind. The pressure of the call was already enough to drive a person insane. Adding the curse of the sin of solace to this burden was not for the weak of heart. Well, whatever. I'll just let Saint use it for now. He was impressed by the cursed blade, though. Its fundamental properties were already fearsome enough, considering that this transcendent weapon's sharpness and durability were further enhanced by the perfect jade enchantment. It also synergizes well with Nightmare's Dreadlord attribute and the Mantle of Fear ability. What made it so alluring to Sunny was the mental damage it dealt, though. Mind attacks were an insidious thing. While not as obviously destructive as more straightforward elemental damage types, and not as universally deadly and hard to defend against as soul attacks, they possessed one frightening quality. The more sentience a being possessed, the more that being stood to be damaged by a mind attack. What it meant was that while lesser nightmare creatures, beasts, and monsters would not be as susceptible to the sinister whisper, the truly dangerous foes, demons, devils, tyrants, terrors, and humans, would suffer terribly from it. And since those were the enemies Sunny was wary of the most, the sin of solace was a perfect tool to satisfy his needs. I just have to be careful not to suffer terribly myself. But even if he did, at least he would be reaping the benefits of the hideous truth. Sunny felt that the cursed sword would become truly terrifying if its wielder managed to unlock that strange enchantment. At its full force, maybe the sin of solace would be powerful enough to strike down even great nightmare creatures. Or supreme humans. With a wistful sigh, Sunny decided to check his progress in other areas, since he already had the runes summoned. Shadow fragments. 873 4000. Not bad. After being stuck at 744 slows 4000 for half a year, he had gained more than 100 fragments in just 2 days. If this continued, Sunny would become a tyrant in a not-so-distant future. Of course, if he continued to fight at that intensity every day, he would also probably be dead by then. Somewhat reassured, he shifted his gaze to the mantle of the underworld. Vanquished foes, 4555 6000. The monumental task of satisfying the requirement of the Prince of the Underworld enchantment was nearing its final stage. With how many nightmare creatures ran rampant in Antarctica, Sunny would certainly be able to complete it soon. Now that his identity as Mongrel was most likely known to the members of his cohort, there should be no problem wearing the mantle more often. He still did not know how the onyx armor would grow after the limit was reached, but hoped to see something incredible. Then, Sunny concentrated on his shadows, starting with Saint. Shadow fragments, 101 200T. Saint was already halfway to becoming a saint, or a transcendent demon, to be more precise. He could not even imagine how powerful she would be once he collected enough memories, or echoes, to feed to his loyal knight. Still, 100 or so ascended memories was not a small amount. Luckily, he could also use memories of lesser ranks, although the process would be much slower in that case. Finally, he read the runes describing Nightmare. Shadow fragments, 14/300. He sighed. To be honest, Sunny had not been very diligent about feeding his steed. For some reason, the Black Courser required much more fragments to ascend than Saint had needed. Maybe because he was already a terror, or maybe because Saint had come from a race created by Nether, the Prince of the Underworld. In any case, Sunny felt that helping her become transcendent was more important than elevating Nightmare to an ascended terror, especially considering that his terror ability, Dream Curse, was still locked. And speaking about that ability, at least, there had been more progress on that front. Nightmares required 112 to Y1000. His steed had already subjugated more than 100 nightmares, both making himself stronger and growing closer to unlocking the Dream Curse. Of course, that task was still far from being over, but Sunny had a feeling that there would be a lot of progress soon. Antarctica was in the throes of a cataclysm that had become known as the Chain of Nightmares, after all. It was bound to breed a lot of them. Better yet, up until now, the Black Steed had been limited to only subjugating nightmares of masters, simply because awakened humans did not dream. Awakened nightmare creatures did, however, which meant that Nightmare would be able to plant seeds of fear into their souls, and then visit the dreams of those abominations that had survived the encounter to harvest them. Maybe I should let him loose more often. And that was that, more or less. His own shadow fragments, that of Saint and Nightmare, the prince of the underworld enchantment, and the dream curse. These were the things he needed to concentrate on. Then there were other things: his arsenal of memories, the power of his cohort, and the equipment of its members. Oh, and he also had to survive somehow. I probably will. Sunny had made a lot of progress, but there was a lot more progress still to be made. Luckily, Antarctica was just the place to make it. It had an inexhaustible reserve of nightmare creatures of all kinds, with numerous new ones soon to arrive. As long as one could stay alive, there were countless opportunities for growth. Master Jet had been right. This campaign was going to shift the balance of power across all of humanity. Many new champions would emerge, many renowned warriors would become even stronger, many would die. Thinking about that, Sunny suddenly felt somber. Now, he was even more convinced that the great clans would not be able to stay away from the chain of nightmares for long. He just had to make the best of it before they arrived then. Chapter 871, Wild Imaginations. 1,000 duels, undefeated. He even went against Morgan of Valor before ascending. No way. What do you mean, no way? The recordings are all over the network, dude. No, Luster is right. I don't know much about the dreamscape, but it is a fact that he contained a manifesting gate as an awakened alone. I also heard that he is a bastard son of a saint from the House of Night, maybe even of Nightwalker himself. Actually, some say that he was created in a secret government laboratory from the DNA of powerful nightmare creatures. But the research was abandoned, with all records destroyed, because he was the only test subject who did not go completely mad. I've heard that he is a woman, though. Does he look like a woman, you idiot? Well, now that you say it, he is strangely petite. Has anyone seen Captain undressed? Belle, did you get hit in the head during the last battle? Keep your voices down. You'll wake him up. Already awake, Sunny was laying on his comfortable bed and listening to his subordinates gossip at the front of the steadily moving rhino. His expression was hard to describe. These fools. He had expected that much from Luster, but Kimmy. Not to mention Belle. Belle was supposed to be their reasonable senior, damn it. With a sigh, Sunny rose, threw a neutral glance at the suddenly quiet trio, and then went to the kitchen to make some coffee. He poured himself a cup of the fragrant drink, added some synthetic sugar to it, then sat down in the lounge area of the APC and took a delighted sip. Throughout all of it, 3 pairs of eyes were following his every move. Sunny shifted slightly, then looked at them in return. What? Is there something on my suit? His black bodysuit had already repaired the tears it received in the battle against the stone hive. Its smart fabric was truly something else. The more Sunny wore it, the more he understood how well designed this unusual uniform was. One could argue whether it was dapper or not, but overall he was extremely satisfied with his new equipment. Hearing his question, Kim and Luster suddenly looked away with furtive expressions. No, it's nothing. You look great today, Captain. Sunny raised an eyebrow. Belle, meanwhile, continued to stare at him with a strange expression. For some reason, Sunny suddenly felt an impulse to cover his chest with an arm. He frowned. Anything you want to ask? The swordsman simply nodded and smiled. Yeah, Captain, are you mongrel? Luster and Kim flinched and looked at him with horror. Sunny, meanwhile, scowled. Who are you calling a mongrel, bastard? Bellel shook his head. No, I mean, are you Lord Mongrel? You know that guy? Damon, as expected. Truth be told, the moment the question had been asked, he had no choice but to answer. Sunny just stalled a little to collect his thoughts. He shrugged. Oh, yeah, that's me. Then, Sunny took a sip of his coffee with an absolutely nonchalant expression. Luster and Kimmy, meanwhile, were staring at him in shock. Their eyes were as wide as saucers. For a few long moments, there was nothing but dead silence. Sunny enjoyed his drink for a bit, and then scratched the back of his head. But don't tell anyone, it's a secret. I wasn't really supposed to become known to the public, you know. Their expressions slowly changed. A hint of grave understanding appeared in their eyes. The 3 looked at each other, and then Kim resolutely nodded. Of course, Captain, we will keep silent about who you really are. We'll tell Samara, Quentin, and Dorn, too. Don't worry. Sunny nodded with satisfaction. Isn't it great to have such understanding minions? Of course, he had no idea what it was that they thought they understood. But that was the beauty of it, he did not need to. The best and most convincing lies were those that people built in their heads themselves. Human imagination was a wild thing. Whatever idiotic theory his soldiers decided to believe, be it that their captain was a secret love child of a famous saint or a product of a forbidden government experiment, it was all good with him. The point was that they would keep it to themselves. Just like that, a few more people learned that he was mongrel. Sonny felt a bit sad about that fact. On the bright side, it seemed that he would have no problem summoning the mantle of the underworld in the future, at least now when the cohort acted independently of other human forces. Luster, too, was looking at him with a newfound reverence. If there was one inconvenient thing about the revelation that Captain Sunless was, in fact, the famous Lord Mongrel it was, that Belle kept throwing strange glances at Sonny. What the hell? With a friendly smile, Sonny took his cup of coffee and returned to the back of the Rhino. Climbing back onto the bed, he then took out his communicator. There, a new message was waiting for him. As his smile grew a little wider, Sonny concentrated on the lines of text. Rain, hey Sonny, how are you doing? Everyone is talking about the Southern Quadrant campaign. That is where you went, right? Are you an officer now? Tell me so that I could brag about it in school. One of my classmates' sister is apparently an ace MWP pilot. She won't shut up. Stop talking about it anyway. Are you doing well? The news says that everything is going great, but my dad seems very stressed. I don't think I've ever seen him so tense. Oh, I'm doing well, myself. A few kids in my class stopped coming to school, so I guess they are at the Awakened Academy now. But I'm not showing any symptoms yet. I am practicing my archery and swordsmanship every day, though. You'll be proud of your pupil. Sonny reread the message a few times, then finished his coffee, grinned, and started composing a response. Sonny, hey. An officer? Gods. Who do you think I am? Of course I am. Let me tell you, I am a captain of the most elite unit in the whole army. I have a bunch of powerful awakened under me and a reputation so fearsome that other masters want to be my friends. The Devil of Antarctica. That's what they call me. Well, I'm sure someone does, maybe. Just yesterday, an actual saint personally expressed gratitude to me. I will probably get a medal soon, too. Oh, I am also in charge of a cutting-edge armored personnel carrier called the Rhino. You won't believe how amazing it is. Let me describe it. First of all, Chapter 872, Spreading Nightmares. The initial several weeks of the Antarctica campaign were the most intense, at least for now. The divisions of the First Army steadily moved south, fighting through the swiftly growing swarms of nightmare creatures and establishing strategic encampments along the way. These encampments were going to serve as the transit points of the evacuation networks soon. Moving through them, all the population of the Antarctic Center was going to be relocated to the siege capitals to await eventual salvation. The same thing, only on a much larger scale, was happening in East Antarctica, where most people of the Southern Quadrant lived. As days went by, the chain of nightmares grew more rampant. New gates manifested with increased frequency, disgorging more and more abominations into the waking world. Luckily, the burden pressing down on the First Army also grew lighter, since more and more divisions reached their destinations and entrenched themselves inside the cities that would become humanity's strongholds in the coming months. Without the need to brave the enemy-infested wilderness, the lives of the soldiers became less perilous. That was not to say that they were not terribly busy. Turning a populous city into a wartime fortress was a laborious task, too. However, no one was as busy as the First Irregular Company. Just like Master Jet had promised, the Irregulars almost never rested. While other soldiers had specific tasks that sometimes forced them into battle with the nightmare creatures, and sometimes did not, the 7 cohorts of Irregulars constantly moved between various flashpoints to douse their flames. Day after day, battle after battle soon, the novelty of Antarctica's sobering reality dissipated, and the endless procession of combat engagements blurred into one continuous, bloody ordeal. They were doing their job still. Not all battles were as large-scale or as dire as those in the first 2 days of the active operation. Some demanded more precision than all-out effort. Others simply had to be fought because no one else could be spared to address the situation. Tempered in this terrible crucible, Sunny and his cohort were becoming accustomed to the trials of the chain of nightmares, as well as each other. Their ability to fight as a single cohesive entity increased, finally reaching a satisfactory level. Their personal power grew, too. Sunny was not the only one who had managed to enhance his arsenal of memories, for one with so many nightmare creatures that needed to be slaughtered. Each member of the cohort acquired new combat tools. Quentin, for example, had received a beautiful suit of plate armor for killing a fallen officer of the Stone Hive. Just like the carapaces of the monstrous insects, it was pure white and incredibly durable. Luster managed to acquire a charm that was supposed to increase his luck, even if no one could really tell whether it actually worked or not. Samara was now wearing a chameleon cape that blended into the environment and masked her position. Others were using new memories too, armed with them. The cohort managed to survive these perilous weeks without suffering any casualties. They swiftly racked up kills and contribution points, as well as soul shards and reputation among the soldiers of the First Army. However, their fearsome reputation paled in comparison to that of Mongrel, who was slowly turning into somewhat of an urban myth. Sunny had had no plans of unleashing his weird alter ego again so soon, but the circumstances forced him to make a different decision. There was just too much for him to do. Often, several missions of utmost importance appeared simultaneously, and since he could not be in two places at the same time, he sent Nightmare and Saint to take care of the easier ones instead. This approach turned out to be surprisingly effective, armed with the Sin of Solace, which synergized extremely well with both of them. His shadows had become a real menace on the battlefield. They were also able to traverse the mountainous terrain of the Antarctic center with great speed, allowing Sunny to dispatch them to complete missions that required speed above all else. Of course, these missions had to be on the lower spectrum of hardship. A transcendent weapon or not, Saint and Nightmare could not compare to the power of the cohort itself, especially since he led it personally. So while Sunny and his soldiers dealt with the most dangerous tasks, Mongrel popped up here and there without any discernible pattern, appearing from nowhere and disappearing without a trace after dealing devastating damage to the nightmare creatures and leaving only severed corpses behind. Suffice it to say, Saint's popularity among the rank and file of the First Army grew explosively. The Guardian Angel of Antarctica, that title, coined by a random network journalist, was spoken by them more and more often, jokingly at first, but then a bit less so. Sunny, meanwhile, finally earned his own nickname. Unsurprisingly, he was being called Devil now, or, infuriatingly, Little Devil. The latter one, however, was only used by the other captains of the irregulars. No one else dared to speak it to his face or behind his back, really, considering that the rumor that the young master was always watching and listening quickly spread through the army. Of course, not everything went well for the human force. The First Army experienced several painful setbacks. More soldiers fell and more were critically wounded. The technical equipment was starting to grow less and less reliable as time went by, even if the most critical pieces worked as intended due to expensive spell tech countermeasures. It was getting harder and harder for the awakened to find a safe place to sleep without being whisked away by the call. Worst of all, however, was the effect that the chain of nightmares exerted on mundane humans. Nephis had once told Sunny that each person infected by the spell carried a small seed of nightmare in their soul, and that those of them who failed to pass the first trial became a Category 1 gate themselves. The chain of nightmares increased the rate of gate manifestations manifold, and that rate terribly spread to mundane humans as well. Not only was there an anomalously high amount of young people falling prey to the spell in Antarctica, but also, for the first time in half a century, people outside the usual age of infestation started to succumb to the first nightmares en masse as well. Which meant that just like during the emergence of the first generation, no one was safe. Anyone could become infected, fail the trial of the spell, and turn into a murderous nightmare creature. The people locked inside the siege capitals, those being relocated through the evacuation corridors, even the soldiers themselves. A tense and fearful atmosphere slowly settled over Antarctica. Chapter 873, and full of terrors. Chilling darkness veiled Antarctica like a burial shroud. The twilight of the dusk had finally succumbed to the inevitable advent of the cruelly lasting absence of light, and the long night had come to the southern quadrant, pregnant with countless horrors. This night was going to last for many months, and by the end of it, who knew if any of the humans it embraced would still be alive? How many of them would be lucky enough to see the light of day again? Sunny had never experienced a night quite like that. The sun was gone, and the empty sky was full of brilliant stars. The pale visage of the moon lingered among them from time to time, coming and going as it pleased. Despite how dark and cold the world had become, it was strangely beautiful. Back in the alloy jungle of the Northern Quadrant siege capital, stars were rare guests. Light pollution kept them away. Similarly, there were no stars shining upon the cursed expanse of the forgotten shore. Antarctica was different. Despite the coming of the night, it only grew more dazzling. The stars, the moon, and the breathtaking tapestry of the aurora australis that shimmered above them as ethereal shades of green, blue, purple, and red flowed into each other, all of it was very beautiful. However, that beauty hid oppressive horror. Dread, that's the word to describe it. This is a land of dread. Sunny and his cohort were walking through the encampment of the 1st Evacuation Army, their armor covered in dents and painted by the blood of the nightmare creatures they had recently killed. The tense and tired soldiers hurried to get out of their way, throwing intense looks at the irregulars. "Look, it's the devils. They're here. Thank the gods." Recently, they had become a comforting sight for the rank and file of the First Army. Wherever irregulars appeared, problems seemed to disappear and the number of casualties drastically fell. Of course, these victories had a cost. It's just that the soldiers weren't the ones paying it. With a grim expression on his face, Sunny glanced at Dorn, who was limping and seemed barely able to walk. The giant man's face was pale and covered in cold sweat. He had received a severe wound in the last battle. Even with Quentin's help, Dorn was going to be out of commission for at least several days, which meant that they would be short a man should a new mission arrive. The campaign was still on track, but it was getting more dire with each day. The air in the encampment was full of fear and tension. More and more nightmare creatures poured into the waking world, and now that darkness reigned Antarctica unopposed. Any area that was not illuminated by powerful spotlights could be hiding a deadly threat. Even then, the spotlights tended to flicker and break down spontaneously, which made even artificial light unreliable. People were constantly on edge and afraid of every shadow. After all, most couldn't see through them like Sunny. Even worse, danger lurked not only in the darkness outside, but also inside the fortified encampments. The spell was spreading through the ranks of mundane humans like a plague, and anyone could turn into a rampaging monster if left alone for too long. There was no real safety anywhere. If things are like that after just 1 month, how are we going to last the whole year? Shaking his head, Sunny looked ahead and caught a glimpse of the rhino. His eyelids suddenly grew heavy. He really needed rest. Despite the glum atmosphere in the camp, objectively things were going reasonably well for the field army dispatched to the Antarctic Center. It had already advanced almost all the way to the southern edge of the narrow landmass. All but one division, the one Sunny and his cohort were assigned to, had already reached their destinations and were in the process of converting them into siege capitals. Evacuation networks had been established, with fortified transit outposts placed near the strategic points. Constant patrols maintained protected corridors for the armored convoys to ferry the civilians from smaller settlements into the handful of human strongholds. Up north, the relocation was already in full swing. Here in the south, however, it was only starting still. The first phase of the operation was well on its way. Maybe we'll get to relax behind a thick wall of a siege capital soon, too. Climbing into the rhino, Sunny glanced at Kim. Status? She studied her military communicator. Army Command designated this camp as a green zone. Last check was 13 minutes ago. He nodded. A green zone was one with no gates close enough to affect the dream realm anchors of the awakened. People could sleep safely within its confines. Okay, Quentin. Tend to Dorn. Kimmy, Luster, Samara, and Belle. Enjoy the first sleep shift. I'll stand watch until you guys return. They nodded and soon disappeared inside the sleeping pods. Quentin got busy dealing with Dorn's injury, Using both his aspect and an extensive medkit, Sonny, meanwhile, walked over to the command and communication suite and sat behind a console. He lingered for a moment, and then summoned his runes, shadow fragments. There were 3324000 shadow fragments, 133 over 200. Nightmares required, 209 over 1000. And finally, vanquished foes, 5523 seconds 6000. He had achieved a lot in the past month. So much, in fact, that exhaustion had seeped into his very bones. Sonny had long lost count of how many nightmare creatures he had slain, but it had to be a couple of thousands at least, even more if he counted those that Saint and Nightmare had hunted down. Mantle of the Underworld will probably be first. Even though he could not wear the onyx armor in every battle, its counter was swiftly approaching the limit. Sonny sighed, and then dismissed the runes. Almost simultaneously, the symbol of an incoming communication appeared on the console's screen. He closed his eyes for a moment. Looks like a new mission is here, after all. Chapter 874, One Last Mission. A moment later, a familiar face appeared on the screen. Despite the pressure of leading the first irregular company into the meat grinder of the Southern Quadrant campaign, Master Jet looked relaxed and at ease, like she always did. No, actually, she almost seemed to look better than how she had back in the safe haven of the NQSC. It was as though the exhaustion that everyone in Antarctica felt could not touch her. The perpetual dark circles under her eyes were gone, and her whole presence appeared strangely invigorated. Sonny had a suspicion of why. Soul Reaper flashed him a bright smile. "Hey Sonny, how is it going?" He simply nodded. "We cleared that fallen nest. Dorn was wounded though. He'll need a few days to recover." In the past month, his relationship with Master Jet had gradually changed. They grew a bit closer and more familiar with each other. That sense of camaraderie could only be forged by fighting side by side in numerous battles, and was only enhanced by the exceedingly rare background they shared. Wasn't it funny to see two outskirt rats leading the elite government awakened into battle? However, at the same time, after observing Soul Reaper in combat more, Sonny felt that he had come to understand the nature of her flaw, and it was a grim one for sure. A long time ago, in a different lifetime, almost before even the Forgotten Shore, Sonny had heard from Teacher Julius that Master Jet was feared by many awakened. As the old man had put it, her problematic personality destroyed any chance she might have had of ever becoming a saint. Actually, the exact words he had used were, "Who would want to help a psychopathic killer become a saint?" Later, Sonny had learned more about the unspoken rules of the awakened society, and came to believe that these rumors were just a pretense to justify the suppression of the sovereigns, a product of the contempt proud legacies felt toward a clanless nobody from the outskirts who dared to become stronger than them and refused to bend the knee to their power. But now he was not so sure. Sonny had seen that Jet possessed a bizarre ability to absorb the soul essence of those that she killed. He had also witnessed her powerful but fractured core that constantly leaked essence like a broken vessel. Later, he also observed that she seemed to lack the ability to naturally regenerate essence as all awakened could. And so he now suspected that Soul Reaper's flaw forced her to constantly pursue murder. It seemed that killing was the only way for her to prevent her fractured core from becoming lifeless and empty. That would actually explain a lot of things. From the true reason she had chosen to come to Antarctica to why a girl from the outskirts, someone who had never been treated like a human by the government, would decide to become a dedicated government operative. Working for the authorities might not have been the most glamorous job. But if there was one thing it did not lack, it was an endless amount of targets that had to be killed. So maybe those who treated Soul Reaper Jet like a person obsessed with killing were not wrong. They were just mistaken about the reason for her morbid obsession. Which posed a question: could he really trust her? What would happen if Soul Reaper's essence was running low, and Sonny was the only one around? If he was correct in his suspicion, of course. While Sonny was thinking about that, Master Jet grinned and waved her hand in front of the camera. In it was a strange charm. No, actually, it was just a mundane piece of jewelry. The thing looked like a golden circle with 4 stars engraved on it, beautiful filigree surrounding them, and a purple ribbon attached to the top. "What the hell is that?" Noticing his confusion, she shook her head. "Gods, Sonny. Don't you know what that thing is? This is the Transcendent Star of Valor, the highest military decoration one can receive. It's your medal, fool. I finally managed to get the Army Command to issue it." Sonny blinked. "Oh, that's great." Master Jet let out an exasperated sigh. "It comes with a very sizable contribution point reward, too." Instantly, his expression livened. "Oh, that's great." Finally satisfied, Soul Reaper nodded. "It took some convincing to make happen. Anyway, I'll hold on to it until we meet in person. About that, plans changed a little, so you'll have to complete one more mission before that happens. Ah, but don't worry. This one is a calm one, so your man will have plenty of time to recover." Sonny stared at her with a dubious expression. Master Jet summoned the map of the Antarctic Center and highlighted several points on it. "The division you're with is not going to proceed further south, since there are no big population centers there. However, there is a very important research installation at the southernmost point of the landmass. It's about 400 kilometers away from your current position." Sonny studied the map. The Antarctic Center resembled a gargantuan snake that sprawled across the ocean, and the installation Jet mentioned was situated at the very tip of its tail. "What about it?" She shrugged. "Your mission is to reach the installation, secure the VIP currently residing there, and bring him back to the nearest siege capital. There is a garrison of local awakened commanded by a master at the installation too. They will be responsible for evacuating the regular staff and scientists. You can choose to go back on your own, but that would be a jerk move, considering that they are expecting reinforcements to help them make the journey." Sonny thought for a bit, then nodded. "Sounds easy." "Yeah, no way. Something bad is definitely going to happen." Master Jet smiled. "It does, doesn't it? In any case, after that is done, we will probably remain within the walls of siege capitals for a long time, and finally have time to rest. Good luck." Chapter 875, Old Roads. The next day, Sonny and his cohort separated from the battered division. The mass of vehicles and soldiers marched down the broad highway, heading to a large city that was situated behind the mountain peaks to the east. The Rhino, meanwhile, continued south. 400 kilometers. How long do you think it will take us to reach the research installation?" Sonny was currently in the cabin of the APC, leaning on a bulkhead as he looked ahead. Luster glanced at him from the pilot's seat and shrugged hesitantly. "Hard to say, sir. The terrain here is really rough, and we'll need to climb over many mountains before reaching the coastal plain. There are some old roads here and there, with tunnels that can serve as convenient shortcuts. But since no one took care of them for half a century, it's mostly a stone labyrinth, so several days at the least, maybe even a week if we want to be really careful and lower the risk of stumbling into a horde of nightmare creatures." He hesitated for a few moments and then added, "Of course I can get us there in a day if we leave the mountains and drive along the coastal thoroughfare." Since most of the Antarctic Center was mountainous in nature, moving across its expanse with speed was somewhat of a problem. It would have been much faster by air, but no one was suicidal enough to use an aircraft in these circumstances. The reason was very simple. It was impossible to load enough armor on a flying vehicle. Not only would its electronics and navigation be swiftly fried by the interference of the gates, but even worse than that, countless nightmare creatures in a 100-kilometer radius would be able to see and take the aircraft down. Since very few awakened could fight effectively in the air, being swarmed by winged abominations or taken down by a hail of ranged attacks from the ground was their worst nightmare. Still, that did not mean that there were no means of traversing the Antarctic Center quickly. Since the terrain was much more flat near the coast, there was a convenient highway running along the shore of the cold ocean. It's just that traveling by it was not exactly safe, especially these days. The ocean, too, was overflowing with nightmare creatures. All kinds of horrors hid beneath its restless surface. Sonny sighed. "No, let's not go anywhere near the coast. Avoid those old tunnels, too. Just take your time and take us over the mountains, Luster. Dorn needs time to recover anyway." The young man smiled. "Yes, sir. Will do, sir." Sonny gave him a bleak look and shook his head. Ever since the revelation of his identity as Mongrel, Luster had been acting as an overly enthusiastic sycophant, It was honestly a bit bothersome. Well, all right then. He walked back to the back of the rhino and sat down to meditate. In the past month, the importance of replenishing one's essence had become painfully clear to all awakened in Antarctica. There were just too many nightmares creatures around, and too many battles that had to be fought. Maintaining one's reserves was often the difference between life and death. It was also an inescapable restriction that defined how often and how well one could fight. Sunny's essence capacity was roughly 4 times as vast as that of almost any other master, but the rate at which his soul restored it was only twice as fast. As a result, he needed 3 to 4 days to fully replenish it. Sleep, rest, and meditation helped, but who had time to rest in Antarctica? All of them had to get accustomed to fighting while suffering from a dire deficit of essence. That was another reason why the campaign grew harder as days went by, and why everyone was exhausted. His cohort was in a much better spot than most thanks to Luster, but Sunny himself had not been able to make use of the young man's extraordinary aspect. Luckily, they were not supposed to fight any serious battles in the next few days. That was already a blessing. Keeping his eyes closed, Sunny rested as his shadows scouted the route ahead. The rhino climbed the steep slopes of the mountain chain with agility that was surprising for a machine of that size. The aurora australis shimmered with ethereal lights in the black sky above it, but the mountains themselves were shrouded in darkness. Driving a heavy APC up and down the treacherous slopes at night was not for the faint of heart, since one small mistake could send it plummeting down from a deadly height. Still, Luster seemed to be doing fine. He even had his lucky charm summoned, rubbing it from time to time with a nervous look. Everything seemed calm. Slowly but surely, they were moving toward their destination. Sunny made an effort to memorize as much of the landscape as he could, knowing that they might be coming back the same way after picking up the VIP at the research installation. The southern edge of the Transantarctic Mountains was, indeed, a real labyrinth. Tall peaks rose into the sky, with remnants of broken roads clinging to their slopes. Dark maws of tunnels that had been burrowed through the mass of stone appeared from time to time, filling him with a sense of alarm. The roads, as well as the tunnels, had been constructed long before he was born, during the dark times. Back then, humanity had been busy destroying itself in a series of devastating wars as the world fell apart around it. Then, the nightmare spell came, and many things changed. The old roads were now abandoned and in a state of disrepair, but the rhino could still make use of them. The progress was slow, however, and it was only made slower by the need to avoid active gates and prowling swarms of nightmare creatures. In the end, it took them almost 4 days to traverse the mountains and descend to the coastal plain at the southern edge of the Antarctic Center. From here, they could proceed to the destination at full speed. As the rhino accelerated and flew across the plain, a powerful blizzard enveloped it, reducing the visibility almost to zero. That was when things started to go wrong.